Is it going live now? Hey, I think we are going. I think so. Chat people. I see Geoduck Geoscience is in there. I see Warren Briggs is in there. Okay, and then it'll go live at. Okay, cool. Okay. I mean, that's okay. We will manage with that as long as we're all on the same page. Um, I am? I am? Mm-hmm. Hey, how's it going? Do you hear me? Am I still in mono? Diana? Diana, do you prefer to go by Diana or DJ? Okay. That should be going. Properties. Yeah. Audio mixer. It might be in mono. I'm trying to fix that in the options right now. Um, did that work at all? Okay, now I moved us both to right. Move us both back to the middle. What are we getting? Yeah. So it might just be coming through one headphone for them. Are you able to get it now? So I'm trying to see audio monitoring. For OBS, for mine, it's my microphone. I mean, it says microphone. I don't know what to tell you. And then I have audio output capture, so it's capturing what should be coming through my headphones. So maybe it's an issue here. No. Let me try messing with it. Let me try one more thing, because I think I might know what it is. Let me try this. Now are you guys going through both? Now are they going through both sides? Waiting to see. Can you guys say something, Warren and Diana, to see if it's going
Testing, testing, audio. 1, 2, 3.
Is that going through both sides?
No, I don't think I'm still no audio from me on the stream.
What the heck?
Oh no, never mind. It's working. You're
Okay.
good. My audio's in it. My audio levels are super high, so I'm going to turn that down a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whatever I did, I realized that on my end too, so I'm actually gonna bump my gain down just a bit. Am I coming through both?
No, you're still mono left for some reason, but I'm working. Diana, would you be willing to try talking as well? Your mic's off, Diana.
Well, that explains why no one was responding to anything I was saying.
That would do it.
Hi, people in the audience, can you hear me?
We're professional. We're just kind of warming up. Hey everyone, do you hear everyone? I may
No
just.
one has responded to being able to hear me, so I'm not sure if anyone can. Oh,
Okay,
wait,
you're
was
good.
that Robert
Yes,
saying he
yes,
can
we
hear
hear
me?
DJ would be good just to be explicit about who you're talking to.
Yeah. Especially because there's clearly a delay between when we're talking and when. Yes. Okay. Awesome.
Cool. Awesome.
Okay. I think we're.
Success.
Yes. Let's go.
$100,000 in a computer science degree perhaps didn't go to waste. Let's get it.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
Okay. Right. We have papers to talk about.
Yeah,
People to
I
talk
think
to in the chat. This is excellent.
I was
Big
gonna say
fan of that.
I think I am only coming through left, and I apologize.
No, no, you sound good, I think.
Okay, well, if I am only coming through the left, I apologize. For future reference, I will get that fixed next time. With all of that said, hello everyone. This is Raptor Chatter's next month in review. We're going to be looking at papers that came out in September. I know this one says November, but it came out online in September, I promise. Um, with that said, I'm here with special guests Warren Briggs and DJ King. Who wants to introduce themselves first?
Sure. Hey everybody, my name's Warren. I go by Warren.Briggs6 on TikTok. I do a lot of stuff with going to dig for fossils, gems, cave exploration. My day job is as a cave explorer, and my education has primarily been in AI development and computer science.
Hi, I'm Dr. Diana King or DJ King, depending on where you know me from on the internet. I'm a micropaleontologist, paleoclimatologist, environmental scientist, and I make YouTube content about paleontology, geology, and debunking pseudoscience on my channel Geoduck Geoscience.
Okay. Yeah, and you should be able to find their contacts down below. I am just trying to get this set up so that I can share it on the Discord as well. So those of you on YouTube who found it, you are earlier than all of the other socials. Congratulations. With that said, first paper, the Ediacaran. So the Ediacaran, if someone wants to delve into that just a little bit, would be great while I get this going. And then we'll chat about the rest of the paper. I apologize.
Anna, you want to take us away?
Sure, I could do. So the Ediacaran, specifically is named after the Ediacaran Hills in South Australia, refers to the community of very primitive animals that you get in the, I believe it was the latest part of the Precambrian, where we start getting all of these really funky, unusual creatures. We start getting a lot of bilaterians. We start getting things like Chania, which look like sort of big, mysterious fronds. There's all different kinds of really strange morphologies of mostly soft-bodied animals that show up just before the modern diversity of animals appear, and we don't really know what the vast majority of them are because they are so utterly strange compared with everything alive today. So that's a little brief overview of what the Ediacaran fauna are. Weirdness from a very, very, very long time ago. And this paper talks about the stuff of that's come from South America, which is really cool because normally when we talk about the Ediacaran fauna, we talk about the stuff from Australia. And nobody really talks about South America enough. But they've got some really cool stuff, as this paper's talking about, and as Zeke is about to detail.
Yeah, so what you're looking at here that I think is really interesting is a map of where the different outcrops are. And they show down here with their legend what's going on. So the blue is Cambrian, so just after this period. And then you start getting into this orange where you're starting to get a lot of these fossil sites. And there's a lot more than you might expect. It's really easy to kind of look at South America and go, oh, well, all of Brazil basically is the Amazon rainforest, and not realize there's a lot of diversity in what rocks are showing up there. Um, so yeah, a really rich fossil history of the Ediacaran from South America. You have all of these different formations, and sometimes they overlap. I really like this graphic because it's showing you, the broad sense of what's being found where, and then they just have a straightforward timeline where this is what's being found throughout human history, and when it is we're starting to build this better understanding of the Ediacaran in South America.
So that actually raises a really interesting point. Not so much about the Ediacaran, but just about South American paleontology in general. It's a massively understudied area, and I will maintain that until the day I die. South America needs more. Not only are we finding, from an archaeological perspective, these crazy massive ziggurats in the deep jungles by using LiDAR scanning from orbit, which is crazy to see. But we're finding massive deposits of megafauna, some similar to the stuff that we're finding in not South America, in Australia with underwater cave deposits of kangaroos, which is super cool. But like giant ground sloths that we're finding in cave systems, they found large anteater relatives. And so if you're looking for a place to start doing research, look into South America. The large mammals there, I think, are going to be one of, if not the largest Paleozoic deposits that's going to be studied in the next 15 to 20 years. It's really, really incredible to see.
Yeah, so there's
I couldn't agree more. In fact, in my field, so foram micropaleontology, outside of Brazil, so little work has been done in South America. It's actually kind of painful because people keep posting FOIA to iNaturalist, and I'm 99.9% sure that almost all of them are completely undescribed species. So if we've got any South American micropaleo fans, just go to your local beach. There's a very good chance you'll find a ton of undescribed species.
So cool.
Yeah, there's some new stuff out there.
Very.
Moving on to the next paper. Make sure I'm clicking on the right window. We have a look at Coahuilosaurus lipani from the Cerro del Pueblo Formation in northern Mexico. I am getting the alert that my connection is unstable, so I apologize about that. With that said, this is a fossil that's already been known.
Yeah, the stream was just showing us a loading bell for me.
Well, hopefully it is running at least all right.
Stream looks like it's working.
Okay.
Okay.
Seems like it's working. Anyway, so this is during the Western Interior Seaway cutting through North America. And so you have this really diverse fauna of different ceratopsians throughout the western part of what would become North America. Ceratopsians. Hadrosaurs. I always get it mixed up. Anyway, so these are all of the ones that you have here. Coahuilosaurus is the southernmost one that we know of, and it seems really similar to some of these up here, like Gryposaurus. So really useful for understanding the broader diversity. And as we scroll down, we will get to, it's not super complete, but because these animals are eating so much plant material, the differences in the snout can be pretty relevant to understanding the different species that are there. And then they should have a phylogeny somewhere. Here we go. Which is unfortunately turned sideways, but you should be able to see, here's Gryposaurus, the Cretosaurines. This is the group that it would belong to. And you have this big group of them in southern North America, a few in South America, but none really in Asia. So you can kind of see that, okay, they started in southern North America. Some of them were able to hop into South America and then start to diversify there. With this one being just one of them, which, where is it on here? I'm not, right here. There we go. There's our guy. So you can see it's this branch of them really close to Gryposaurus and Rhinorex.
Something that they mentioned in the paper that I thought was really cool. When they were analyzing the teeth that they found, there are the little denticles or the bumps on the teeth that are used for eating. They're just an evolutionary adaptation. But the shape and size of them, along with the wear patterns on it, those things were eating some tough vegetation. And it's like they were not pushing daisies or anything. They were chomping through some gnarly plants in that time period.
Yeah, I think there's some evidence in the Hell Creek of some hadrosaurs eating wood. So, yeah, they were chewing through hard stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, Now we're going to be jumping backwards in time, but sticking with dinosaurs. So this is feeding in the dinosaur Lufengosaurus, which is an early sauropodomorph. And it has comparisons to what's going on with modern day birds, because birds can do some different things with their offspring. Dana, I believe you wanted to talk about this.
Okay, so I just wanted to give a little bit of an introduction to this because this paper talks a lot about comparing what we see in Lufengosaurus with altricial behavior in birds versus precocious behavior in birds, referring to how the young develop and how the young are raised. Altricial development in birds refers to where the young are born immature and helpless, and will thus need to be looked after by parents. So in this case, parents can limit the exposure of the young to predators by protecting them in a nest. So a great example of this is songbirds, but even outside of birds, humans are a great example of an altricial animal. Whereas precocial animals are where the young is born fairly mature and is able to walk about and run away from predators and fend for itself from birth. So a great example of that would be, say, a lot of ducklings and young chickens, especially, which quite you'll see running around young chicks. So Lufengosaurus is an early sauropodomorph, which is known from both adult skeletons and hatchlings. And the paper looked at the morphology, the preserved chemical traces, and the biomechanics of young Lufengosaurus, and compared them with different birds that develop in different ways, and suggested that Lufengosaurus young wouldn't have been able to forage by themselves, and would have required having been fed by a parent, so would have probably had this very altricial development style. I feel like you should probably follow on from here, Zeke.
Yeah, so I mean, what they were doing is, you cut open the bones and you can look at some of that, look at the diameters and such. Um, and so this is really interesting when you're looking at the overall evolution of dinosaurs because we think of most birds as like, oh, well, obviously they care for the young. The question is, okay, well, when did that start? And this is really solid evidence that it started really early, which makes sense. Dinosaurs' closest relatives are the crocodilians, or at least that are alive today. When you're thinking about birds and crocodilians, they're the closest related. So it's really solid evidence for this kind of parental care being ancestral to all of the archosaurs. So crocodilians, crocodilian relatives, and dinosaurs, dinosaur relatives, pterosaurs, and probably some little ways further back in that tree. So it's really good for answering a lot of these questions about kind of how did nesting start to really evolve in dinosaurs.
I just thought about this, and I don't remember reading anything about it in that paper. What would we have to look for in the fossil record to see if there's evidence of how they're feeding their young? If it's, like eagles where they just drop a fish in the nest and say, hey, good luck, my chicks, eat. Or if it's, being actively fed with a regurgitated mass. Is there a structure in modern birds that supports
You
that?
probably need some soft tissue with some regurgitates preserved. You need stomach content and see if there's a crop or anything.
Okay,
Which
cool.
would be maybe possible in some fossil sites, but not most of them.
Well, hopefully we can find that, and hopefully we can find that in some really zany animals we're not really expecting to see that in. Although it would be a bit gross to think about.
You're telling me that regurgitated dinosaur mass is not what you want to have for dinner?
Um,
No, it doesn't sound very tasty to me.
okay, yeah. Yes, my audio, sorry, in the comments, yes, my audio is only coming out on one side. I apologize. I do not know what the issue is. Otherwise, I would have fixed it. I am sorry.
Is your
I do not know what it is. Does that
is
fix
your
it?
mic USB, XLR, or
It's
CX?
it's XLR.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I think the problem is just that technology is evil.
to some degree. That and also I'm just not that techy of a person and it's my first time streaming with other people, so I'm figuring it out as I go. Next time it will
It's
be
my
more
first
addressed
time
with.
streaming at all, so
Technology being evil, I think actually kind of segues into another paper that we had. It's a little ways down, but there's a paper that we had read about using AI to reduce conspiracy theory beliefs.
Oh, that one way down at the bottom. Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah,
I'll pull that
way
one up
down
real
there.
quick. Um, oh gosh, I'm just gonna Control F.
Oh, we got Tyrannosaurus Rex himself in the chat. Holy cow! Presence of the king.
Oh my gosh, we're all gonna get eaten.
They said that he was dead.
He
Um,
he is risen.
yeah.
It's a
Anyway,
Christmas miracle.
yeah, yeah. Could Arcus repair the next? Maybe. It's an interesting question to look at. But as for what Warren was talking about with I mean, I just went to the paper, and you have a background in
Yeah.
AI and
So
machine learning and such. So,
I have opinions about this. I think that this study's interesting, it's well executed, and it's not going to mean shit in 3 years. I think wholesale that people are just starting to figure out what AI is. And if you take a person who is genuinely, seriously looking at Bigfoot and going like, all right, or ghosts, and go like, all right, if we put a radar dish that's 6 feet wide on this audio recorder, we're going to get ghost noises. Showing them a machine that's going to talk back to them and give them answers for things is never going to end well. People are inevitably going to go, oh, this thing's lying. There's in AI computation something called AI hallucination, which is when AI goes through and it comes up with a random thing or a random answer based on patterns, which is a fundamental part of how an AI is developed. You tell a person who has conspiracy theories that the AI is starting to hallucinate, you are never, ever going to be able to get them to reduce conspiracy theory beliefs through dialogue with AI, which is what this paper is about. You are just going to have this spiral of the AI is lying. It's not doing what we need, yada, yada, yada. And I think that the paper is great. It's well executed. It shows that there's a marked decrease in people's beliefs in these conspiracy theories when they have a dialogue with an AI system that will go through point by point and say, okay, no, the Earth isn't flat because we have photos of a globe and orbit and maths and differing coordinate. And anyways, great study. I think it's awesome. I think that by and large, it will be, if you reran the study in 5 years after mass adoption of AI, your findings are going to be entirely different.
I mean, it's good to
I
have the
agree
early data
completely.
point.
Yeah, I find that AI will often just spit out a lot of incorrect facts when talking about very niche topics anyway. So if you're talking about a very niche conspiracy and trying to debunk it, I don't know how well that's gonna work. And also like I watched a ghost hunting video that a friend of my mother's actually posted to YouTube, who is a like an absolute nutcase who makes videos looking for ghosts everywhere. And every time a moth flies in front of the camera at night and is caught, they think it's a floating orb, a supernatural floating orb. So I'm not sure how well these people would listen to AI explanations of anything.
So
For some people.
Tyrannosaurus himself came in the chat with an actually super excellent question. He asked, we have people who believe in irrational things who are set in those beliefs. Fundamentally, can we use our rational methods to deal with this? And the study indicates yes. By using that structured system, it shows a marked decrease in their belief in the conspiracy theories that they discussed over a several month period. That's really interesting.
Hmm.
It's a discrete finding in a lab setting that shows that yes, you can use a rational method to deal with the irrational. You know, it begs the question also of what are the longer term effects. This wasn't run over a 1 year, a 5 year, a 10 year psychological study. That would be really, really interesting to see. This was only done over a short term.
Yeah. So that'll
Yeah.
be something interesting to follow down and throughout the next few years and see how that goes.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see as well.
Yeah. Jumping back to dinosaurs. Uh, so here we go. A new ceratopsian. Let me jump onto here because I can read it better on the other screen just because of how that's formatted. It says Sayamago. I say I can read it better, and then I mess it up anyway. Seisemagnamus sagusai is from Japan. It's a new Neoceratopsian. Gosh, you can't just copy. Here we go. Do it here. So Neoceratopsians, you are thinking of. I know I'm just using Wikipedia, but it's generally pretty good at just showing the basics of it, at least. Which, yeah, you're thinking of basically all of the really large ceratopsians, but also all of these really small ones too. And it would fit a lot closer to one of those small ones. It's fairly early branching from what I recall. You know, little head, really big cheekbones that it's probably using to like power really large muscles and crunch into things. Which seems to be pretty consistent across the ceratopsians. However, what's really interesting about this one is it has a combination of traits that help to align it with some of the ceratopsians that are like this from North America, meaning potentially not just the ceratopsians that were smaller migrated into North America, got big, and then a few of them came over. Seemingly some of the small ones did this as well. So we're really starting to better understand the Bering Land Bridge during the late Cretaceous and what effects it had on animal populations throughout the northern hemisphere. And again, yeah, just not a super complete fossil, but reasonably, considering how most terrestrial fossils from Japan aren't the best because it was such a coastal area. We can live with that. So, yeah, neat ceratopsian. Anyone have anything else to tab in on it?
No.
Yeah,
However,
sorry.
oh, go ahead.
They said no, sorry.
Oh,
But what'd you say?
so a dude in the chat just fired off a super interesting topic that has literally nothing to do with what we've been talking about, but I would like to address it. So Captain Knuckles in the chat, there was a YouTuber, Ruhi Sinet, who came out with a video talking about going into Krubera Cave in Georgia. Really interesting video, great videography on it, and it is one of the deepest caves in the world. I believe it is currently the second deepest with published maps. With unpublished maps, I know that there is at least one other cave that beats it, putting it in third. He found a new species of fish 8 kilometers down. Yes, but no. He did find a new species of fish that has not been confirmed yet, to the best of my knowledge. But it's not 8 kilometers down. It can be 8 kilometers of travel, but in terms of vertical extent, from the surface to the bottom of the cave, is 2 kilometers. So that's an important distinction. 8 kilometers under the earth is obscenely deep. If we found a cave that went that far, it would be insane. What's interesting about the fish, though, is that we're finding all kinds of new species of exceedingly rare endangered fish. There is one that's scientific name is literally Lucifer that was found in Texas because they drilled a well, dropped a bucket down the well, filled it up with water, pulled it up, and boom, there's a gnarly looking fish. So really cool area that there's a ton of research happening. New species are consistently being found. That's my aside to address that comment. Super cool. Thanks for bringing it up.
And Warren is a cave paleontologist, so
yes,
he would be the one to know this.
You can check my Instagram. Just found a new species of fossilized shark in Mammoth Cave.
Yes.
And that paper will be talked about in one of these monthly reviews in a bit, I assume.
Yeah. It's in review right now. Hopefully out soon.
Awesome.
So this one's really interesting, this next paper, because it's talking about how soft tissues and proteins are preserved. And it's all about chemistry, and it's like from the American Chemistry Society. So like it's a really fancy journal. I am not a really fancy chemist. So to my best understanding, if you have two identical particles, they cannot at the same time be in the same quantum state, which means when you're doing organic chem with all of these different proteins and such, you have your acetyl groups that exist. And they're protected from breaking down because the other acetyl groups existing next to them cannot be in the same quantum state. So basically, because they're constantly shifting these states, it is helping to prevent the breakdown of the proteins. That is my understanding. I do not understand quantum mechanics of electrons and quarks. So if anyone else knows more about that, go for it. But really interesting to like it's so much math. Um, but it's
I
really
started as
interesting
a
to see.
physics major and ended my physics major because I'm really bad at it. Not going to weigh in on this one. Hands off.
Okay.
I actually got an A star at GCSE physics when I was like 15, but I can't remember any of it. And I don't think we really covered any of this. I have friends I could ask who'd be able to explain this, but by the time they got back to me, the stream would be long over, I expect. So,
No worries,
oh
no
well.
worries.
Oh, hi Astrid. Lovely to see you.
Oh, hi Astrid in the chat.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Next paper.
Yep, next one. So it's a Spanish saltosauroid titanosaur, Conchosaura pintic, pinticinus. I can
Pinti-
talk.
Pindiestra?
Pinticinus. Thank you. One more time, Warren, for the people in the back.
Pinticyniestra.
Thank you. So yeah, it's a Spanish titanosauroid. This really just helps to add to the diversity of what's happening in Europe. It's not the largest titanosaur. Some of these are the largest animals to ever walk on land. This one's, a little bit more modestly giraffe to elephant sized. So really interesting to see that kind of diversity just in body shapes and sizes. When I get down to, there's some of the bones. Let me just go to figures and jump to here. That makes so much more sense. Here we go. So here we are. And you can see that a lot of these are coming from various locations, but you can see the European ones in the blue are blue. Yeah, blue. Are very spread out. So what it's essentially meaning is Europe is at this crossroads for titanosaurs moving here and there. Which is interesting because Europe at this time during the Cretaceous largely would have been an archipelago where it's just a bunch of little islands here and there, some of them fairly reasonably large, but not, an entire landmass like it is now. So what you're seeing is essentially a lot of these different titanosaurs just kind of drifting out through the ocean probably and ending up on these islands at random times. And then they're able to, move into this new island and start to diversify again, but coming from all over the place. So really interesting to see. Biogeography is interesting.
Yeah, I was going to have a chat about sauropod biodiversity in Europe. I feel like you mainly sort of discussed everything here. I did find it really interesting how this paper talked a little bit about how Quanchosaura belongs to a lineage of Opisthocoelicordines who seem to have shown up in Europe, sort of in the Campanian to the earlier parts of the Maastrichtian, and then being replaced later on by the slightly smaller examples, sort of a little bit later in the Maastrichtian, which I did think was kind of interesting, the idea of there being a sort of faunal turnover in sauropod diversity in Europe. And also really interesting how these sort of smallish to medium-sized sauropods, like just a little bit later, get replaced by very much island dwarf types. So you get things like Lyranosaurus, Magyarosaurus, and Pallid Titan, which are only around 20 feet long. Really surprisingly small animals. And I had a lot more to say, but I feel like you said all the stuff I wanted to say earlier, so I'm just gonna stop waffling.
Yeah, I mean, I also thought I missed your comments there on the side of the doc. So that's my bad
It's
as well.
all good. It's all good.
All right, so now we're hopping into Eosuchus lyricii, which is a gavoid, so it's like a gharial. I spelled gharial wrong. It'll autocorrect. There we go.
Yeah.
So it's going to be something approaching this sort of shape, where you have this really long snout, lots of needle-like teeth, good for catching fish. And there were some really interesting talks on this animal at SVP that I'm really excited to come out, but that's not this one. So what you're seeing here is that it's in Europe. It is just after the KPG impact, so the extinction that killed off the non-avian dinosaurs, the non-bird dinosaurs. And the thing is, in the fossil record, these things have a global distribution. There's some in South America. There's some in potentially Australia. There's still some contention about that from what I know of fossil croc researchers. Is there a map in here anywhere? That'll work. That'll show you the various places with, you have them coming from different places. Here's some of the Americas. South America is going to be the more purple color down here. So again, they're getting global.
You don't have the map up.
I'm on the phylogeny. Is there a map in here? I was just going to use
I thought you
the
said
phylogeny.
something about that.
I was trying to find a map, and I couldn't remember for sure if they had one or not. So,
Gotcha.
But you can see they're all coming from different continents, right? And you can look at the bottom here for the what each color corresponds to. What's really interesting is the ones today basically only live in South Central Asia, and they're not very widespread. In fact, they're critically endangered in many places, but they don't have any adaptations for going into the ocean. So what this paper was doing is trying to find the bony correlates that we can use to say, yes, this one was going into the ocean. And they start to do that with some of these, teardrop symbols showing, oh, this one's going into the water, this one's going into marine water. So there's only a few specific cases they were able to find of that, which means either A, this kind of trait of having these bony depressions to put in salt glands may have evolved more than one time, or potentially they were just navigating through a different means to get to all of these continents. Anyone? Anything else? And you can see some of the skulls there, but also during the CT scans, you're getting into some of these kinds of spaces where the glands would be to help get rid of that salt. Anything? Moving on.
I don't think so. I'm going to save my nerd out on CT scans for the CT scanning paper.
The other one, yeah.
Awesome. I have a couple of nerd outs that I'm saving for a bit later on. But a lot of these papers I have depressingly little to say about, and I apologize immensely for that.
Oh, no worries, no worries. I mean, it's kind of I go through a bunch of stuff and I do it all shallowly, so where you guys can help, go for it.
We're getting close to the fish eating bats paper, and that's going to be just like info dump mode for me.
Spoilers.
I look forward to that. I really do.
All right. So this one's with a whale, actually, though, before we get to fish eating bats. We have a Coronodon, which is an early whale, and it's talking about the potential ancestry to filter feeding. And for context, here's the skull of one. And you can see it has these really highly ridged teeth with a lot of cusps on the top. Warren, if you wanted to talk about that, it looks like in the comments.
Yeah, so something kind of interesting about the teeth. The first time I looked at them in the paper, they really remind me of basilosaur teeth that I normally see for sale, commonly from sulfate mines in Morocco, Algiers, and similar North African regions. But what's really cool about it, and the question that I raised was, is it a familial relation, or is it a case of convergent evolution from two different lineages saying, hey, we want to be able to eat the same things? And the paper author actually addressed this in a forum chat on the fossil forum, saying that both animals really share primitive features that kind of go back to the basilosaurid archaeocetes, I think. Anyways, and so they're both eating and inhabiting similar roles in the ecosystem with similar food sources. So anytime that you find things like that that are descended similarly in a different geologic distribution is really, really, really cool. That was my big takeaway from the paper.
Yeah. And this paper is talking about the origin of baleen and filter feeding that way. And I think it's really important for that to look at the crab eater seal, which has these very funky teeth, which it uses to filter feed krill. It doesn't actually eat crabs, despite being called the crab eater seal. So you're seeing similar adaptations when you're seeing all of those very pointed teeth. What they found is that the wear patterns for these teeth that are also, like I was showing, very, lots of peaks and troughs in them, there's not There you go. There's some. The wear patterns on it, so by looking with microscopes for little teeny tiny scratches on them, it's not at all consistent with filter feeding. Instead, these were still going after large prey, such as early tuna, large fish, or potentially even other early whales. So, really interesting to say, like, oh yeah, this is something that we see almost similarly in crab eater seals. Maybe it was doing the same thing, and then just, no, it wasn't. So, still a lot of questions to ask and answer about the origin of baleen and the origin of suction feeding in whales.
Yeah. And it is interesting as well that this paper was written by Jonathan Geisler et al. And it was the same team of people who first described Chironodon and first inferred that this fossil may have been important for the transition towards filter feeding. So it's interesting how that same author team have now put that transition a lot more up in the air. So also shows that all scientists, we can change our minds. And I've changed my mind about things I've published, and I feel a bit sad about that, to be honest. But it doesn't matter. It's all good. Everything is great in science.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of it in light of new evidence.
Yep.
All right, and now the bat one, which I know you guys were excited about.
Let's go.
I'm so looking for. Yes, I'm listening. I'm listening intently, Warren.
Okay. So this paper is really, really interesting. They found a bunch of gar fossils with bats next to them. And that raises an interesting question because we look at modern bats and we know that modern bats, almost all of them will skim the surface of water to catch insects. It's a really common feeding behavior. And we also know that modern gar, bass, basically anything with a big mouth that's really angry will jump out of the water and snag them as they're skimming the water. Something else that modern bats do that's kind of cool. There is one bat that has feet that are specifically adapted for going down and grabbing fish. And so they also get eaten by big fish a lot as well. But what people are able to infer, you have a giant gar that doesn't die very easily, and you have a bat right next to its mouth. That means that the gar probably jumped out, snagged a bat, and because the bats are fairly large as bats go, it's a species of,
Paleontology.
Yeah, Paleochiropteryx. Those things had a wingspan of about a foot, 10 inches to a foot. So that's more than enough wing membrane to accidentally suffocate a fish. So what they found with these cool gar fossils is that they popped up, they snagged a bat, and then choked to death on it. So we have fossil evidence of a predation event between an air animal and a water animal. And that's really, really rare. And it's really interesting because we see that in gar today. The things are so well evolved that they haven't changed in millions of years. Yeah. It's a living fossil. And I got to hold one a couple of weeks ago, which is so cool. And then, so I went down the rabbit hole. I was looking at gar fossils. One of my friends raises gar. I was like all in on it. And he sends me a paper. A couple of years ago, they found a gar fossil that, was several feet long, just a monster. And they spot something weird in its mouth. It turns out they found a gar fossil that was eating a coprolite. And there was paleo poop that it was eating that was saved. And I don't know who looked at it and went, yes, that little brown dot is poop. But I have questions for them being able to identify that off the cusp.
There are certain formations where coprolites are incredibly abundant. So sometimes it is a very safe bet.
I suppose that makes sense, yes. So that's most of my rant about fossil fish and bats together. Fossil bats are so cool. We almost never find evidence of predation. They're super hard to find fossils of because their bones are super fine. A lot of what I do with cave paleontology, I end up finding bat mummies and fossils, which is one of the only repositories. So anytime we find more evidence of them with behaviors of them and their predation, so cool to find.
All right. Hopping on to the next one, we're looking at trackways. These are specifically trackways made in Aeolian dunes, which means it's a wind-blown dune. Think of, your big sand dune kind of environment, right? This one was looking at some of these Permian to Cretaceous ichnofacies, which means essentially, hey, can we use the assemblage of different trackways that are in one area to say what kind of broader dune environment was. Was it semi-humid? Was it super arid, etc.? What they find is largely no. There is one exception. Oh, I always do that the wrong way. Where there's some areas where you get the octopodicnous ones, which essentially just means it's a spider or other arachnid of some kind, where you have the four sets on each side. And in those, you often do get large tetrapod trackways, but that's basically the only one that you can consistently find any sort of association with. And so they're going, yeah, it's generally more dry, and they actually compare it directly to a modern site. Did I scroll too far? No, I did not. A modern site in Argentina, where you have some sand dunes, and they are... this paper is so much longer than I remember it being, which I'm going to fully blame on me getting just stuck behind and trying to catch up. Because as soon as this was done, I started writing the next one again. There we go. So here's the modern example, right? You have some of these little tetrapod tracks, but you have all kinds of spiders, scorpions, camel spiders running around. This is really the only kind of ichnofacies, so assemblage of different trackways that you can find in alien dunes that actually have something to talk about in a serious way, where it's, look, we can say something about the environment. The rest just coincide way too much to have any kind of consistency. So... and again, that's from Permian to the Cretaceous. So that's over the course of, what is that, 300-ish million years ago, all the way until 66 million years ago. So huge swath of time where it's like, yeah, we thought we had good connections and we don't actually. Trackways for anyone? No? Okay. Staying in South America, where that site was in Argentina, we're actually moving to Brazil. I'm looking at a new fossil of Exauridodon riograndensis, which there's a new bone bed of them, and these are cynodonts, but they're relatively large ones. It's really easy to think about a lot of the early mammal relatives as being relatively small, when this one was actually relatively large, and it looked much more carnivorous in the other image, but really it was just a happy little guy eating its plants. What's really interesting here is there's a whole bunch of them found in one spot, and the fossils were found to have had evidence of scavenging by insects and their larvae, which means they were probably all deposited there at basically the same time. And, they all died together. It's not a, oh, hey, they all got washed there periodically. So it's stronger evidence that these animals were grouping and, living in herds to some degree. They would have been around 2 meters, long, so about 6 feet, so pretty large. But there would have been large pseudosuchian croc-like relatives around, on land, hunting them. That could have pushed 3 meters, if not a little bit more. So potentially that kind of grouping was not just a social, oh, hey, we're all getting together to hang out because we like each other, but also that way there's more of us, so not all of us get eaten. So, yeah, and the new bone bed, there you go. There's a few of them all washed together. And then they pull out some of the bones and show some of the different traits so that they can show, this is how we identified it here. And then you have your different parts that are most commonly found. Few skulls, few gosh, what is it? The few limb elements, and then just lots of isolated teeth and such. So, yeah, there you go. There's that one.
I just want to add, I love how this piece of paleo art has given it a cute little smiley face.
Oh, that one that I had found?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's still showing on my screen where I'm looking at the stream. I think there's a little bit of a lag in when it's showing, but it's so cute, adorable.
And as long as we're all on the same page. Oh, did I get logged into this? Yes, I am logged into this. Okay, cool. Okay, so now on to the next one. Pterosaur remains from Afro-Arabia. So the Arabian plate and Africa were pretty close, and the African plate were pretty close together throughout the Cretaceous. So now we have a new smaller species of pterosaur named from them. An Amtanian Al-Arabia, which is, again, a new species. It's closely related to the Asdarcoids, or it is an Asdarcoid. There's one piece that's from the very large Aramborgiania, I hope I'm saying that right, which has a 10-meter wingspan.
Yeah, I
So
think so.
so 30-foot wingspan, give or take. This one is about half that size. So smaller animal, really interesting to see. Um, really importantly, though, the bone structures in the smaller one are more similar to what we find in birds that need to flap in order to fly. Whereas the larger one is much more of a gliding type wing. So there's more. Gosh, where is it? I know it's in here somewhere. I put it in there somewhere. I know I did. There you go. There's ridges inside of the bone for the larger one, which is what we see in gliding type birds. Whereas there's a lot of hollow struts in the smaller one, Inabtanian. So really interesting to see that even though Inabtanian is still a very large animal, it has a 15-foot wingspan, 5-meter wingspan. Um, it's still flying like a small animal. So just fundamental different biomechanics in the pterosaurs.
So, kind of crazy aside that has to do with the gar fossils and the pterosaur paper. I have no truth or evidence to validate this claim, but a friend of mine who specifically studies gar that I reached out to said that when he was trying to buy gar fossils, he came across one that a dealer was saying had pterosaur parts in a gar. I cannot find a paper discussing it. I can't find any evidence, but I am trying so hard right now to find that fossil because if it's real, that would be so crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that's real, mind blowing.
I know there is one fossil fish from the Solnhofen limestone that has a Rhymphorhynchus in its jaws. So,
Yeah, I've seen that. It's incredible.
I got to look that up. Pull that up for the chat. I want to see what this looks like.
Fish ate Rhymphorhynchus. Hopefully I spelled that right. Images. Here you go. And it's
I gotta
nice clear
find it.
logger shot. Where there it is. Warren, I am not hearing you.
Testing again.
There we
One,
go.
two, three.
You just
Okay.
dropped for a second.
Yeah, no worries.
So yeah, there you go. The fish definitely did eat the pterosaurs when they had a chance. So I think there's actually a few of them.
Yeah.
But oh, and then you get the
Wow.
David Peters stuff in there too, who's a little not great at being accurate with some of his studies.
If two particular science communication YouTubers are watching this, which I doubt you are, but if you are, I'm noticing you using David Peters. I doubt. Anyway,
Don't trust
no,
David
you're not in the
Peters.
chat. Never listen to David Peters. If you're watching this and you see David Peters, ignore him. He's bad. He's very bad.
I'm a scientist at heart, but I love collecting things. I would have such a hard time handing that away to a museum to study. It would
Yeah.
have to happen after I found it. But oh my God, that's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah, there's some really neat stuff out
Yeah.
there.
Wow.
All right, staying. The previous fossils were from Jordan. Now we're moving to Lebanon, with some Lebanese amber. And so this is a. Gosh, I know I had this looked up better. Yeah, okay. Just making sure I'm looking at my notes. So this is a new non-biting midge. So if you think of like, the little gnats and stuff that fly around and they kind of bite at you, this is one of those, except it doesn't actually bite you. Coming from amber, I should be able to get figures. I need to remember I can just jump straight to figures. So yeah, this is the new one. This is really interesting to find this kind of thing because at the end of the body, there's a structure called the hypopygium, which is really useful for identifying species when we're looking at it in the modern day. This one doesn't actually seem to hold with that because essentially it's so close to the single or origination point of a lot of these insects that they're very similar. So you can't just look at this trait that we look at in modern day insects and go, oh, well, this is how we do this with all these fossil ones. So tragic, but it is what it is.
So, little minor geek out here, both etymology and entomology. The name for it, which is Electronura pinhoi. The first name for it, Electronura. Electro comes from electron. electron is, I believe, the Greek root for amber, and is also weirdly enough where we got electron, the part of an atom. So it's all weirdly related. Amber, atoms, kind of interesting. I didn't know about that, and found it when I was researching.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to have a geek out here, but I wasn't sure how much we want to talk about the paper before I can have a geek out.
Go for it.
Okay, so actually, several people I know specialize in chironomids. One of my co-supervisors of my PhD does, and one of my best friends does, because they are very heavily used in paleoclimate research. And we actually have a really good idea about how this species would have lived, because the subfamily, the Tanipodinae that it's a part of, is actually still alive today. And they have these really distinct sort of worm-like larvae, which initially feed on algae before developing predation-adapted jaws after I believe it's their second molt, at which point they start feeding on other small invertebrates before they become adults. And their prey species for the older larvae even includes other species of chironomids. And the fact that they're very, very similar to so many midges that are alive today, as I said, their subfamily within the non-biting midges still exists, demonstrates a very key feature of evolution that a lot of younger creationists like to misuse as fake evidence that evolution isn't real, which is basically that if there's no selection pressure driving a change, if nothing about your animal's physiology gives it an obvious advantage or disadvantage, then even as an environment changes, then that doesn't mean that animal is necessarily going to change very much over time. Evolution sometimes does follow a rule of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And a lot of insect groups are very much a great example of that, including this one. So, yeah, funky in a lot of interesting and cool ways.
Yeah, it's a neat little guy. But I am not as well versed on insects as you are, so I appreciate the assistance on that one.
You're welcome.
So this one is a new Lagerstadt. Pennsylvanian doesn't mean it's from Pennsylvania. It's actually much closer to, there we go, Massachusetts, Rhode Island area. But the Pennsylvanian is a time period, because when you're thinking about eastern Pennsylvania with all of the coal seams and such, that's the time period that it's named for. It's a part of the Carboniferous. In the US, we split that up. In England, they don't. In other parts of the world, they do or don't, depending on what the rocks are like. What's neat about this one is this is the new one, and it kind of connects with all of these various other Lagerstadt sites where there's really, really incredible fossil preservation. And you can see here the various things that have been found at all of these different sites. As we continue to move into the figures, we can see some of these fossils. View an article, there we go. Where we have large trackways, and a lot of this is mostly just compression stuff. However, as you continue to move down, you get like insects that left their impression in the mud, so you can see exactly what kind of insect it is, which is super neat. It really helps to fill in what's happening here, because this is really, as forests are starting to get super diverse, you're getting more plant life, you're getting more animal life, and so you're starting to really see a lot of the changes that we kind of take for granted today, because it's like, oh well, yeah, insects are always there. Well, no, at some point they were starting just in little things like this, and we're starting to really start figuring out how this entire mountain range that is the Appalachians kind of had this big runoff event that caused a very rich and diverse alluvial fan system off the edges of it. Anyone? Moving on.
Yeah, sorry, my entomology brain didn't get round to reading this paper.
I mean,
before we started, I'm sorry.
This is largely just a report of, hey, we have all of this stuff. We're going to describe it all later. And then
that's cool. There are some very interesting shapes in there. I am really curious, like, especially given the age of this, like which insect groups we'll be able to find, and how many of these are going to belong to extinct groups because they look, I mean, that one in A of figure 3 is extremely unusual looking. Um,
You said which one?
Very much to the,
Three?
oh, figure, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was looking at, sorry, for some reason, every time I look at the stream, I'm about 50 seconds behind you guys.
Oh, yeah.
Um, like some of these shapes
Oh,
do look vaguely like modern insect groups, but some of them really don't. So I'm, yeah,
Yeah.
really interested to see what they're going to turn out to be. I'd love to send this paper to one of my entomologist friends actually and see what she thinks.
I mean, I'm sure there'll be some interesting stuff. Um, and then, again, just then it makes the kind of landform reconstruction of where all these fossil sites are coming from. So here's Maison Creek, which has Tully Monstrum for context. Same time period, but more inland. And then there's another one for Warren to hop into.
all right. So this is a super exciting paper for me. People are finally using CT scanning, uh, or finally leveraging AI models to speed up their CT scan analysis. So for those of you that aren't paleontologists in the chat and who are watching, um, historically we have a dinosaur skull, right? We can look at the outside of that. We can look at all of the areas that we can look into, like the little holes and stuff. But the real internal fine structures in the skull, we would never normally be able to access. And historically, there have been a couple times where people went through and they took a bone and they ground it away in small strips and drew pictures of every individual slice. But we have CT scanners and they can do that for us. And that's awesome. The problem with that is, though, we get a skull and we have all of this data. We have a huge amount of data because we've scanned it. We have to process that somehow. And that means usually making your grad students or interns go in by hand and paint the scan to say, this is where all of the bone structures are. This is all bone. This is the matrix. This is bone. And take all of the slices and glue them back together. It's sure great if we were able to automate that. And that's what these people finally went and did. And so they have taken and made an AI algorithm that can take all of the individual slices of each CT scan, glue them back together, and automatically go in and pick out all of the bone in a concretion. Now, there's still a lot of space that we need to go. It shows in a couple of the diagrams, the one that your mouse was on, kind of that brownish one.
Yeah, I just got there.
Some of the artifacts. And so that can be small gaps between pieces of bone. It can be small pieces missing from it. But it's still an incredible advancement forward. It notes in the paper that they saved months on this. I think that realistically, in the next couple of years, we can get this to a point where you put your bone into an MRI scanner and you can get a fully annotated structure out of the machine in less than a couple of hours. The implication of this is, with the rapid advancement in CT scanning technologies, there is potential to have field jacketing procedures where you go in, you take a bone, you jacket it, and you never take it out. You would be able to take it, put it in a CT scanner, which is cheap and efficient and non-destructive, and have models of the bone to do anything that you would need to do, saving possible soft tissue preservation, other ornamentations or small marks on the bone that would be erased in preparation. Really, this presents a massive step forward in our ability to process data.
My thought with that actually immediately went to, with soft tissue preservation, that Montosaurus, they have or had crests, but it was all soft tissue.
Yes.
And they found this because there was a little like depression in the mud just above the head.
Yes.
So otherwise we wouldn't have known. If we had the whole skull with that kind of technology and were able to run it through, we'd have gone, oh, what is this gap right here, a lot earlier. So yeah, I'm also excited to see this kind of be worked on. And even just at this resolution, you can start going, okay, well, I need to go back through and clean it up. But you're saving time because instead of being a 500-hour workload to put everything together, it suddenly becomes, maybe a 50-hour workload.
Not
This is
even.
also like reminding me. Oh, sorry. It's
Please go
reminding
ahead.
me instantly of Natalia Jagielska's recent work she was talking about
Mm,
on Twitter, where they've been finding soft tissue in pterosaurs, but you only see it because of because of infrared light. And if you didn't shine, or was it ultraviolet? One of the two. And if you didn't shine that over the fossil, you wouldn't have seen that there was soft tissue there. So a lot of fossils are getting extracted from the rock that have soft tissue, and without sort of light, we wouldn't see them. But maybe this scanning would really help find a lot more soft tissue in, say, pterosaurs and other things, and save a lot of really cool data. So again, I'm really, really excited about the potential for this.
So I am so excited about this that I actually sent an email to the authors of the paper last night with ideas for how to push it forward. For people
Awesome.
who weren't in the chat earlier, when I talked about this, my background is with AI development and models like this. I proposed, so we've got one model, right? We put things in, it segmented it, and it spit it back out, and we have this gorgeous thing that still needs repair. What people have started doing is they started stacking them. So automatically you have one AI that goes in and builds the model, and another AI that's trained specifically on cleaning them up. And by building them off of each other like that, you increase the efficiency of it a crazy amount. So I think that that's a next step forward that not just likely, almost 100%, I would bet gets taken. And then the other is a complete change in how we approach paleontology. Don't take the bone, take the mass. Get the largest piece of rock that you can get around the piece and scan it and see what's in. We have the technology, it's getting cheaper, and now it's getting efficient. That's a turning point.
yeah. Yeah, this will be really exciting for the future. I honestly have some small fossils I want to get scanned that I want to send these guys an email and be like, hey, can you just segment these for me and just see if we can start with a small scale thing? Might be interesting.
What do you want to get scanned?
Just some fossil teeth, pathologic fossil teeth.
Do you need the internal structure, or do you just want
I,
to?
I would like the internal structure, yeah. So, at least on some of them, make sure there's not damage in the middle.
Yeah, that'd be
But
cool.
that is for future research. So now we are moving on to polar dinosaur tracks of the Wonthaggi Formation. The Wonthaggi Formation is a formation at the southern end of Australia, and during the Cretaceous would have been at least near the Arctic Circle, if not beneath the Arctic Circle, meaning it would have gotten some periods of complete dusk, complete nighttime, like 24-hour nights. Um, so yeah, that's a really neat thing to find. There's a bunch of tracks from here. Unfortunately, I don't have access to this paper, so I'm putting it up here, but just through Google search. But you can see there's a lot of theropod tracks, which is interesting. One of the potential implications of this is that the theropods, after this, cold winter, dark winter, would have been a little bit more prevalent to needing to walk around to find food, as opposed to herbivores, where it's just like, okay, well, there's some tree clearings here and here. They're not doing as much active searching for food. And that, especially depending on how much they're hunkering down for the winter, if they're hibernating or not. There's a lot of different implications here that we can start asking questions about. Whether or not we get answers to them is a little bit up for debate. Anyone else?
The question that I had for these polar regions, why are the tracks mostly preserved from theropods?
Yeah, so what they were suggesting is essentially as things ice over during the winter, you start getting the spring and summertime melt. And during that time, it's in a lot of these boreal forests, there's a lot of plant richness. So the herbivores may not be moving as much, whereas the predators need to go and find them. It's kind of like how during the dry season with lions, it's easier for them to find prey because all of the prey is at the watering hole. If everything is a watering hole, you have to get lucky and try and find it. That kind of concept.
That's really cool. Thank you.
So,
Yeah, thanks for that.
yeah. And again, a lot of that is speculation, but I think it's perfectly reasonable speculation to be like, yeah, this could be a causation of this bias. Okay. And then real quick, we're going to be jumping back to the Devonian. This is right as forests are really developing. Um, and this is looking towards a Devonian plant community in Luxembourg. And what's really interesting here is I don't know if there's a great figure for it. We can at least look here though. One of the really common plants from the Devonian that is missing is called Xylophytes, Xylophytes, um, which I will Google real quick so you guys can see it, because it's not in this site, so you're gonna need to get a better look at it. Oh, there's not any images on Wiki. Darn. But yeah, just these kind of like very basic, stemmy, woody, short plants. What this more or less means is the Devonian, as I said, was when forests were really getting started. We kind of expected it to be like, okay, well, the forests are pretty much consistent throughout because there's not enough time for competition to show up. Clearly there is, because this plant just doesn't show up here, but it's very common throughout the rest of Europe during the early Devonian when this site is from. So there's something funky happening with this specific deposit, and either its preservation biases or its actual fauna that it was holding, or flora that it was holding. Anyone? No? Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Like, plants, I try and cover everything. It's hard to be an expert in everything. And
I know.
you're sitting here very good with your climate stuff and all your microfossils.
On my forums. Yeah. Struggling to find ways to become relevant here. But I do have one paper a lot later on that I really have a lot to say about.
Definitely thought I had access to that paper. Anyway, so there you go. There's the bird. It's Longoteryx, which, it has these pointy teeth at the end. So it's like, oh, well, it's probably grabbing insects and stuff. Look at it a little more closely, and instead they found stomach contents of gymnosperm seeds. So if you're thinking of like your pine cones, each of the little leaves that has a seed inside of it, that's what it was eating. So not at all what was expected for this bird. You can see some of the kind of seed pods in here, in the fossil, stomach contents. But again, just not at all what people were expecting. We can't just necessarily go, oh, well, it has pointy tip there at the end of its beak, therefore it was capturing small prey. We really need to get more direct evidence on what feeding strategies these early birds were using. Anyone, anything? Oh, we already did that. Oh, no, we didn't. I'm just getting too far ahead. That's okay. All right, so now postcranial of Basanosaurus leptorhynchus, which is an ichthyosaur. So postcranial is just everything behind the head, and a lot of these were early on fairly eel-like. And I know they have a nice pretty graph here somewhere. There you go. A nice pretty graph where you have the more dolphin-like ones later in the Jurassic, but early on a lot of them are fairly eel-like. Basanosaurus actually kind of lines up in between some of these, Guizhou ichthyosaurus, which is starting to get much more dolphin-like, and some of these really early ones. So it's actually kind of this perfect like missing link for the body shape. Anyone else have things to say before I continue on? No?
Part of me kind of wonders for ichthyosaurs and such animals, comparing the brain cases, because I've never looked into this. Modern dolphins, if they would have had the capacity for godlike behavior, I don't know of any fossil evidence to support it, but it would be cool if it was a thing.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's done brain case stuff on ichthyosaurs. I think a lot of the ichthyosaurs are flattened, so it's hard to do that. You need to get a Kimmy Chappelle type who's a wizard with micro CTs to reconstruct the skull. However, they did also reconstruct.
Do we have
any what?
I was gonna say, do we have any evidence for echolocation in ichthyosaurs?
I don't think so. No.
I'm looking that up. That's really a cool question.
I do think it's really interesting that they were able to rebuild the girdles, the pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdle, in this paper, so you can really see how much lift the flippers would have been getting as it was swimming through the water. Because lift is really important for anything swimming through the water. So yeah, but especially predators, because that kind of dictates how maneuverable they are. So really
Take
interesting
it
to find.
for what you will. the fossil wiki fandom that pops up when I search directly in Google
Fossil
says
wiki.
ichthyosaurs were incapable of using echolocation. Uh,
Were or were not?
or not.
Yeah. That was my
Okay.
guess.
Research in brain case and ears.
Oh, this one's trying to download, isn't it?
Okay. See, I searched on Bing because that's what automatically comes up on my browser for some reason. And I'm finding a random blog post where someone has said, based on some papers they've linked it's possible but impossible to know at the moment.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
I
But
think
based
that
on
would
their
be
large
accurate.
eyes, it's probably a no.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're looking at
Um,
ophthalmosaurus, ophthalmology, like if you're thinking about like your optometrist,
yeah,
same root
Yeah.
word, and they're saying that, or they named it that because it has a giant eyeball. So it's
yeah.
much
So it
more
looks like
likely that it was
most of
just
them, at
diving
least, were
in.
mainly visual hunters. Yeah.
Yep. So this is the first bird from the Eocene of Argentina, which, the Eocene is 10-ish million years, starting about 10-ish million years after the extinction that killed the non-avian dinosaurs. So you're getting the first bird there. This one is a bit younger than that beginning of the Eocene, but still, excuse me, the earliest one known. It belongs to, or potentially is recorded to the Uranoides, which are a poorly known group of birds. They're probably close to the paleonaths, or potentially are paleonaths, which are the ratites. So when you're thinking in South America, what you're thinking of is the rhea. So I'm going to look up a rhea for you. Oh, birds. There we go. It's an ostrich for South America, for lack of a better term, but potentially the first fossil of one of these that has been found in Argentina, the earliest one rather. Very scrappy material. Birds don't fossilize well. If you're going to try and become a fossil, my life pro tip is don't be a bird. Your bones are too
I'll
fragile.
try.
But
The
again, really,
fossil bird dinosaur feather that they found in amber. Crazy.
oh, that was
Have you
crazy.
seen
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, then this one, we're going to be moving and staying with paleonaths slash ratites, but this one I'm just going to try and jump to figures with. So this is looking at the brains of many of these animals. So what they're looking at is in the youngest individuals of the bird. So these are embryonic, right? They're not showing up with the wulst, which is one of these lobes on the side of the brain. So kind of like this, or this little lobe here on the side. What that means is potentially if we're looking at the earliest birds, they also may not show that trait. That might be something that popped up later in the development of the birds. Now that's something that needs to be tested, and they are very clear. I talked to the author and they told me very explicitly, this is a hypothesis. We do not know for sure. But maybe when you're looking at a lot of these early birds, especially the juvenile ones, they just may not have that. So that might be causing bias in our understanding of bird brains and bird brain evolution. They also looked at the emu and the cassowary, which have fairly similar brain shapes, which is interesting because they diverged 30 million years ago. And there are dwarf species of each of the genera. So each genus has some dwarf species, and seemingly the brain shape is fairly conserved. Overall, what that's meaning is just that we don't know necessarily why bird brains change so much. Because hypothetically, you'd be going, okay, well, cassowaries are more in the forests. They're going to need a different brain than the emus, which are going to be more in the grasslands and the plains. So, some weird stuff to answer about some of these bird brains. And you can see they did all kinds of morphometric points for it to really compare these in a very solid way. So, but yeah, weird to see the overlap of the emus and the cassowaries.
I discovered that I have a deep-seated fear of emus. I was exploring a cave on a game preserve, and I got chased by an emu. Those things are not playing. Anything that's that big and has red eyes does not belong.
Emus are terrifying. You heard it here
I mean,
first,
honestly,
folks.
I think I would hate to be kicked by one of them. The damage it could do would be horrific.
They're gnarly.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
And
are.
they're
They are genuinely
fast.
scary. Yeah.
All right. So next one, this is a mega El Nino, and so Diana, do you want to talk a little bit about the you because you do some climate stuff with forums, right?
Um, I do. The stuff I work on is on a much different time scale
Ah,
to El Nino and La Nina. But I could sort of explain them a little bit.
well, I was gonna say, do you just want to do the
It's
end
been a while.
Permian?
Ah, yes, the Great Dying, the worst mass extinction ever. Um, which when I was looking at so I first looked at the Great Dying when I was doing my A levels in geology, which is the stuff you do before you do your degrees in the UK. And back then, when I was looking at the Perma-Triassic extinction, the general sort of consensus seemed to be that that it was driven by that it was caused by basically the coming together of Pangea and ocean stagnation, and basically nowhere near enough water going into the center of land, so you get this like huge dry parts of the landmass, and potentially ocean stagnation causing gas to well up and get blown across the land and just kill large swathes of everything on the land. Um, I believe that there's been a lot more stuff going on to do with the Siberian traps,
Yeah.
since then, and like indicating that that might have also played a very significant role in it. Um, but yeah, so El Nino and La Nina, related that this paper talks about are climate patterns that are in the Pacific Ocean, um, where so during normal conditions, trade winds blow west along the equator, taking warm water from South America towards Asia, and which replaces the warm water Sorry, my brain, it has been a long time since I've read this. Um,
No worries.
basically, trade winds drive upwelling in the Pacific, and El Nino and La Nina are two opposing patterns that break those conditions. Um, so yeah, episodes of that they typically last about 9 to 12 months, and they actually do seem to have some interesting effects on sea level on a local scale. You can see that in tide gauge records in New Zealand. There was some work by Rob Bell et al. That talked about that, but I'm talking about a completely different time scale to the stuff that this paper is talking about. And I haven't got a chance to read this paper, and I feel like my thinking about climate in a different time scale and also not
Is
having really
affecting
looked at
that.
this interview is affecting my ability to talk about this
Oh, no,
reliably.
no worries, no worries. But I mean, the main thing is the Permian Triassic extinction is devastating. There's been a lot of
Yeah.
questions about why that is, including why does it seemingly happen faster on land than in the ocean? They're offset by a few thousand years. What this is
Mm.
suggesting is that a mega El Nino was triggered, which caused very rapid warming, which meant only animals that could A, adapt to their environments changing, getting much warmer rapidly could survive, or animals which could migrate effectively to cooler climates could survive. The ocean may have been kind of buffered from this by the sheer scale of the ocean. Those kinds of changes are going to happen slower than what happens in the atmosphere. So, at least that's what they're suggesting, and so that's potentially why there's that offset of the marine extinction happening after the terrestrial extinction. So, I thought it was neat. Um, they have
Yeah,
all
me
kinds
too.
of modeling for this, so it's a bunch of computer models, and I will still always harp on no model is perfect, but some models are useful, right? You're
And
you're never
some are
gonna,
really good.
huh?
But
Oh, some
well,
of them are really
and
good,
some
yeah.
are really good.
So yeah, you can kind of see.
Especially in climate. But yeah.
Yep. So you can kind of see where this heating is all happening, especially right around the equator as you start getting later into the um, extinction. All right. And now we get to go to Isle of Wight. If only we had someone from the
Yes.
Isle of Wight here to chat with us.
I know. If only we had someone from the Isle of Wight who had actually also, by sheer coincidence, done her undergraduate thesis looking at the Wealden Rocks on the Isle of Wight. Oh my gosh, I wonder who that could be. Oh wait, yeah, it's me. Um, so yeah, this was a really cool paper that looked at the paleo environments of the Hypsilophodon beds in the Upper Wessex Formation on the Isle of Wight. The paper basically found that the rocks were a floodplain. You have this savanna-like environment further indoors that was still not indoors, further inland that was still periodically wet, which gives way to salt marsh and mudflat. And there is very much a transition between this sort of more terrestrial to mudflat environment over time. And Hypsilophodon have been found throughout this segment, without really all that much diversity in other taxa, the reasons for which seem a bit mysterious. But it looks like they were accumulated more by chance in this area over time than a very widespread and common animal. If anyone doesn't know, Hypsilophodon was a small ornithischian. It was quite basal, I believe, in the Ornithischia lineage. Its taxonomy has been kind of confusing because all different kind of things used to be considered hypsilophodontids and then got moved all around the Ornithischian family tree because we basically were calling any small Ornithischian a hypsilophodont. Now, the findings of this paper are completely in line with what I found during my undergraduate thesis. There's a really, really interesting transition as you go from the Wessex Formation into the Vectis Formation, and then upwards into the Atherfield Clay Formation, where you get in the Wessex Formation, things are mostly terrestrial, but we do have these sea level fluctuations where things gradually seem to get more and more marine influenced. In the immediately overlying Vectis Formation, you start to see much more marine influence, and there's a lot more lagoon sediments. So basically, throughout this whole time interval, there was an intermittently closed and open lagoon. And I actually found you can see it on the map, which Zeke has put up on the screen. And I actually found direct evidence for this in my undergrad thesis because I just took some rock samples at random from a few areas, and I had a look at the ostracods in the environment. And you would get saltwater ostracods right underneath freshwater ostracods, and then saltwater ostracods, and then freshwater ostracods. It was really, really interesting to see, like pretty much like centimeter scale or less variation. So this was an environment that was changing quite a lot. If anyone's familiar with New Zealand, very similar environments to this today would be Lake Brunton, or Lake Ellesmere, or I've forgotten the name of the one at the bottom of the North Island. But there's very similar environments to this today. If anyone's interested in looking up intermittently closed and open lagoons. But what's really interesting is that over the course of the Vectis Formation, it gets distinctly more and more and more and more marine. And then at the very top of the Vectis Formation, / bottom of the Atherfield Clay Formation, you get what's called the Pernabed member, which is where this whole ecosystem quite like sharply transitions to being suddenly it's clear that the barriers to the lagoon seem to have broken, and you start getting these coral-rich sediments. There's a coral called Holocystis elegans, and there's just tons of bivalves that suddenly start appearing all throughout this habitat. To that, the whole area just gradually gets more and more and more and more flooded. And you get the Atherfield Clay Formation, which is solely shallow marine, and then it transitions into chalk, and it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And as far as we know, this entire land mass that these dinosaurs were living on was just consumed by the sea throughout the later part of the Cretaceous. So all of these animals would have just died because of that. On the coast of the southern South Island, it's an absolutely astounding bit of stratigraphy. And you can always find at least some cool fossils. If you don't find dinosaurs, you can find so many cool shells, including if you go to the top of these rocks, Exogyrolatissima, huge oyster. It's like this size. But yeah, that's me geeking out over these rocks. Fantastic study. I really wish they'd involved me in it because I would have been able to test their interpretations of mudflats using of marshlands and mudflats using forams, because that's literally my specialty. Like, is in intertidal foram communities, and I've worked in these rocks. And all I could think was, why didn't you involve me in this paper?
So
Like it's great.
since this was a mudflat floodplain type area, what kind of host rock are you finding the fossils in? Is that like a siltstone or fairly tight grained limestone?
Throughout, I mean, it varies quite a lot depending on which parts of the formation you're in. There are a lot of sandstones, there are a lot of siltstones, and there are a lot of mudstones. And it depends kind of what the energy of the environment was at different points in time, because there are areas where it's quite stormy, and you get these like thick shell accumulations, which they call the coquina beds, which are actually really cool. We did some thin sectioning of them and some mineralogical analysis. God, I need to publish the stuff from my undergrad thesis. Anyway, there's a ton of coquina beds in there. It's really varied because the energy of the environment varied a lot. Sometimes, like depending on like what the climate was doing at different points in time. But there are some sort of shaly areas as well, which were sort of mud flat, like basically just soft muds. But there were other areas where it was definitely a lot sandier. It depends where in the formation you're looking, really.
The reason why I ask, I know Hypsilophodon, we don't have any real data to support it being a feathered animal.
No.
And I was wondering if there was any kind of deathbed for that animal where you would have the chance for preservation of soft tissue or other vestigial features, or not really a chance there.
I think if you find some that are in the paleo salt marsh deposits, there's potentially a good chance of if it was able to be buried rapidly, those can be very anoxic deposits. I mean, I've done a lot of work in modern salt marsh deposits, similarly, and like you can find like, oxidation reduction spots and things in them. And I think if you get some in those kinds of areas, there's a small chance that maybe we'll find some. If we find them out in the mudflat habitats, I think it's less likely. We actually in my thesis I found a theropod footprint in the one of the mudflat deposits.
That's so cool.
I know. It's not something anyone's reported on either. It was a cross section. You could see like 3 toes going out. It was really awesome.
Huh.
Yeah, dude, you got to publish your stuff. That's so cool.
I know. I need to. I've published so much stuff since then. But nowhere near enough stuff from there. But yeah. And that's actually quite interesting because that was younger than like Neoveneta or really any of the theropods we've got from there, except the except like Vecteroveneta. So it's probably from an undescribed mysterious theropod, which we won't know what it is until someone finds some bones from it.
I would say everything I've heard about fossils on the Isle of terrestrial fossils in the Isle of Wight is, man, they kind of suck a lot of the time. So
I disagree with that. We've got lots of cool stuff there. If we're on the Isle of Wight at the same time, and even if we're not, you need to go to the Dinosaur Isle Museum. Your mind will be blown, and you will be devastated by the fact that the new Walking with Dinosaurs series isn't having an episode there. Because I am.
All right.
Anyway, I feel like I finished geeking out now. I probably geeked out for way too long about that paper and about those rocks that it was talking about. If anyone's interested, maybe read my thesis, but also my thesis is one of the wordiest, most badly written things in human history. So maybe wait till I actually publish the stuff from my thesis and I'll make some videos about that.
Word. All
Okay.
right. Moving on to our next paper.
Yep. So we're looking at
Yeah.
reproductive strategies in cephalopods. Cephalopods are things like octopi, squid, and then the ammonites. And so this one's actually looking at ammonites. Really importantly, from what we know, those animals go on very rapid reproductive cycles. Like octopi are like, yeah, we're going to live for a year, produce our eggs, and then die. So there's some questions about that with cephalopods. However, this one is looking at specifically little nodules that they report as having very small examples of juvenile ammonites that are preserved inside of these siderite mineral deposits. And some of these look nicer than others, but I can't find that photo. There we go. And so here's some of the really small ones, and they're showing basically that these very small, basically embryonic ammonites are basically are functionally adult ammonites, just small. So what they're suggesting is because they're getting some masses of these, is that potentially what's happening is the egg masses when the male and female would come together would just kind of be a gelatinous blob that would float along, and then they would hatch out of that in shallow waters, which I think is interesting. I'm not familiar enough with the taphonomy of the site to say how accurate that is, but at least when you're looking at some of these that they were able to prep a little better, you can see that these are very small ammonites. You have the siphuncle and your chambers there, I think. So, thoughts?
The thing that I found really, really interesting about that is it's completely different than what modern nautiluses do. With modern nautili, I don't know. They will lay clusters of 10 to 20 individual eggs on a hard surface, and they're just glued there. And then when they hatch, there's photos of people who have gone and collected them. They're tiny. They're just small baby world nautiluses that look like an adult. So part of me wonders if, kind of similar to like salamander or frog eggs, they kind of, they put the gelatinous cluster and then attach it to something. If it's a similar thing with that.
Well, and even with frogs that do that, they do a wide variety of that. So,
oh yeah,
it's interesting to see. I really hope they get some new methods to really look at these, because I do have my doubts on some of these being fossils, but at least the ones that they were able to use the scanning electron microscope for, they seem fairly promising, although I'm sure there's some forms that probably look like this or something. Thoughts, Diana?
Sorry, I got slightly distracted by an email.
Okay.
No, I know so little about ammonoids. I feel a bit annoyed at myself because I should have emailed my friend Martin about these because he's a massive ammonite expert.
Ah,
And I am so sorry.
how
Oh, I
dare
actually
you,
need to get with
Elsevier.
you about that. I discovered a layer of
Oh,
cephalopods in a cave in Tennessee in a Silurian layer. And fun fact, nobody has ever discovered cephalopods in a Silurian layer in Tennessee.
oh,
So
okay.
could be very interesting. I'm trying to use it as a biostratigraphic marker. And some of them
Awesome.
do have shell markers still intact. So
Awesome. I'll send him a message and tell him that you found that and
awesome.
ask him for, like, if he has people that you can contact or if he'd be interested in taking a look at them.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Bouncing onwards. We have some fossils and mostly trackways and resting tracks from dinosaurs from the Upper Jurassic to Late Jurassic of Portugal. Again, largely theropod tracks. There's some really weird morphology with some of these, with this drag mark behind the back of the foot, which also is probably just meaning that it's sitting down, right? That's essentially the ankle bone back here. And then, the rest of the ankle bones are the metatarsals, the foot part that's lifted up, and then your actual toes. Because remember, these are all walking basically on their toes, whereas we walk flat on the ground. They're going to have their toes there, and the heel is elevated, the heel being analogous to that part of my hand. Hopefully you guys could see that because it was just on the little camera and I'm processing that just now. Um, Regardless, though, really interesting to see. There's a lot of animals that could have made this, right? I think that's like the big takeaway. It's theropod track. That's great. This is comparable to the Morrison Formation, and you get a lot of the same animals. You get Torvosaurus, you get Ceratosaurus, you get a species of Allosaurus, Allosaurus europaeus. You also get an early Abelisaur. There's a lot of different animals that could have made this, but it's nice that it's starting to get published on because trackways, I think, are more important in a lot of ways than body fossils sometimes because, every animal has one skeleton to fossilize. It leaves thousands of footprints in its life that could fossilize, so it gives you a much better snapshot into the animal's life, I think.
I mean, I love the fact that there's a footprint trackway that tells us that Acrocanthosaurus could jump onto the sides of a sauropod. Apparently.
Potentially. I'm
Potentially.
I
You
have
got
not
your
looked at
doubts?
that in great detail myself. That's
Yeah.
my big thing
Astrid
is I
would
haven't looked at it
have
that
words
closely.
about this situation.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Yeah, because I remember reading about that a while ago, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, we never would have got that from fossils." But I mean, obviously, we'll see what people say about it in the long run. But potentially, very, very interesting.
yeah. All right, here we go with this. So this is all about sea squirts, which are tunicates. I'm just gonna search tunicates real quick, or
Yep.
actually I'm just gonna do the scientific name for them. But these are some of our closest relatives as
Yeah,
far as
they are.
vertebrates are concerned. They're not quite vertebrates, but they are close.
Yeah.
Water comes in,
In fact,
water comes out.
Yeah,
Nutrients get stuck
genetics
inside.
yeah, genetics shows they're closer related to us than lancelets are, which is crazy because lancelets almost look like the most primitive a fish could be whilst still looking like it should be a fish, but they're less closely related to us than tunicates. And tunicate larvae are very chordate-like. But carry on.
Yeah, I was gonna just pull up here and go, yeah, there's a lancelet. It's the closest you can look to a fish without being a fish.
Yeah.
And then you have these things, and these things are closer. What's really interesting is these are some fossils of them from the Miocene of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is just before I believe just before the Africa and the Strait of Gibraltar got closed off and the Mediterranean Sea dried up into a giant salt plain. And the species that they describe here died. What's important is these fossils are all just these little spicules. So this is kind of what they use to build up their skeleton, is just a bunch of little pieces like this. But it really is just adding to the diversity of them that there were in the proto-Mediterranean, in the late Tethys Sea. And so we can hopefully start being able to rebuild some of these kind of reef systems that they were living in.
Yeah, I remember during my undergrad, we did a load of field work in. Oh yeah, there's lancelets. Very cool. We did a load of field work in. Oh, hang on, wait. Is my stream just
Your
really
stream is
far
behind,
where we
yes.
are? Oh, this keeps happening. This freaking keeps happening.
No worries,
God,
no
this
worries.
is driving me insane.
Just remember to look at
No,
the Zoom call.
I know. I'm looking. I just keep looking at the stream because I'm looking to see if any interesting comments show up.
Uh,
Um, no, I remember when I was doing my undergrad, we had a look at we went to southern Spain for field work, and we did some work looking at the evaporite deposits in associated with the Messinian salinity crisis, and there was a couple of meters, I think, of halite, and then just tens of meters of gypsum. And it was just the most insanely thick evaporites because obviously you had seemingly the entire ocean, well, not ocean, sea, just evaporating because the Strait of Gibraltar got cut off. Just absolutely incredible and must have devastated biodiversity. I have to wonder how many species went extinct because of it.
yeah.
But anyway.
I gotta send you some photos. There's cave formation rooms where evaporites have leached out of the rock from those dying events. And they'll form crystals that are the length of my arm and are that big around. They come out and grow like a flower spreading from a central locus. It's incredible.
Yeah, I've seen some similar stuff in those rocks in southern Spain, but I'd really love to see that. Thanks, Warren.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Genomes, fossils, and the concurrent rise of modern birds and flowering plants in the late Cretaceous. So this one is largely looking at genomes with the genetic clock, where the genetic clock is we expect very small changes to the DNA just over time due to random mutations. And there's a lot of essentially fail safes built into the way DNA mutates and what protein it makes based on its code. So little changes don't change that much. The animal's still able to function, but by using those little changes, we can start to kind of piece together how far back different species might have diversified. Um, this is doing that, but with modern birds. And what they're finding with this one is actually that a lot of those birds probably started to diversify before the Cretaceous impact right here. So this is when the rock came down, killed off the non-bird dinosaurs. But a lot of these groups are seemingly diversifying beforehand. And really importantly, a lot of the groups over here are. Because we've known that at least the paleognaths, the radites that I was talking about earlier, and the Gyoencerans, so chickens and ducks and chickens, and their relatives had diversified well before the impact. This is some of the first really solid evidence that we're getting that a lot of these groups had also already done that. And just using new methods that can be hopefully a little more precise as to the origin points of a lot of these groups. Because it's always kind of just been floating right around this boundary, and it's been really hard to say when precisely it was. And I'm not enough of a geneticist to comment on the methods. But really interesting. It kind of goes with what we were expecting, so good to see. Yeah, good. Here's some beautiful opals. They're made up of termite poop. This one's really fun. But there's a lot of opal out here in the Eromanga Basin in Australia. This would have been a shallow sea, and then just I had a section on it a couple months ago on how essentially a lot of these opals formed later. But water was basically forced in and started to replace some of this with silica, some of the structures in a lot of fossils. So each one of these is a fossil termite poop, which was replaced by opal. And you think of opal as this fancy gemstone. Sometimes it's also poopy. So yeah, really interesting to find this. Really solid evidence for like, hey, look, termites are doing things in central Australia during the Cretaceous. Really, as these forests started to develop, we don't see insects that have this kind of really large social structure until the Cretaceous. And this is just showing that, yeah, they were getting around the world pretty well. We have evidence of ants from parts of Myanmar and other parts of the world during the Cretaceous. So really solid here. This is 50 million years older than the next oldest evidence of termites in Australia. So yeah, they were pretty important parts of that ecosystem for probably getting rid of old dead trees and such.
So branching off of that, and this does not have to do with the termite aspect of termite opal poop. There are two different artificial human things that are happening right now that are really interesting. One is that we can make opals. That is an underscored fact. Labs make opals. And people are figuring out how to make opals at home. There's a bunch of videos from famous YouTubers who have gone and done it. I have tried to do it. I kind of sucked at it, but it almost worked, so I want to keep doing it. And in a separate vein, people are also figuring out how to make artificial fossils for study of just kind of how that formation occurs. And so the first time I read this, I had the immediate thought, we can make opals. We're learning how to make fossils. How do I combine these and make fossil opals? Because we find opalized ammonites in shells and all kinds of stuff like that. It seems to me like that there should be some kind of mechanism to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So now that's going to be my next mad scientist lab.
Yeah, and I know
backyard project.
I was gonna say, I know some of what you're talking about, and a lot of it is for like taphonomy. You're trying to understand how feathers fossilize. So you place it in mud and then you pressurize it at high temperatures to simulate what it would be like spending, 10 million, 30 million years, 145 million years underground with the various chemicals and whatnot that would go through that to try and see how that preservation might work.
at the SVP conference, there was somebody presenting a poster who had a lizard foot that they had fossilized in their chamber, and it was really, really cool.
Yeah, yeah. Some of those taphonomy talks are really interesting. All right. And now I'm going to immediately Google this one just because it's a group that people do not know a lot about. But they're marine reptiles. Oh, that's a really small image. That's a really small image.
Sorry, I was trying to talk earlier and I didn't realize that I
you're muted.
accidentally
Okay.
muted myself.
Do you want me to run
I'm
that
sorry.
back for you?
I just wanted to bring up regarding. I'm sorry. I realized I'd accidentally muted myself when we were talking about Opal. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to bring up like a little bit. Like a couple of years ago, I actually found a really cool piece of soft tissue that had been fossilized with Opal. I've sent a link in the stream chat, but I found an opalized worm segment, which even preserved its internal structure, which is currently sitting on a shelf back in the National Oceanography Centre in the UK. But that's
where'd you
just
send
a
the
little.
link at?
It's in the stream chat. Oh, hey, Ours is in the chat. Hey, Ours.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my Patreon supporters.
I don't see it in there.
Anyway,
I may have had links off in the chat just for people not spamming things.
Oh,
so
okay. It's not super important.
It just send it to me on the Discord, and I'll put it in the comments down below.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not
doobly-doo.
super important. I just thought you might find it I just thought you might find it cool and interesting.
No, that is neat.
Oh, dude,
Anyway.
yeah, I want to see this.
Yeah, that does sound neat. Anyway, the latosaurs are these weird, largely marine reptiles that are probably closely related to ichthyosaurs, but aren't, and they also all died out in the Triassic, at the end of the Triassic, so rip to them. This one is trying to essentially figure out how they would have evolved, where they would have evolved from, and the thing is, there's a whole lot of them from the Pacific Northwest. So if this would be North America, there's a whole lot of really early ones up here, and then later on it seems like they started to spread more eastward towards parts of China, and there's a lot of really great fossils of them in China, but yeah, it seems like the Pacific Northwest was probably their starting point. So Warren, get out and look in your Triassic rocks near you, and let us know if you find one.
If you help me figure out what formations they are, so help me God, I think have one by the end of the year.
I was gonna say, I think most of them are in Alaska. So, not quite right where you are, but still really nice to see this. They also, if you go to view an article here, we don't really know where they fall in. This whole phylogeny of the basal groups of weird reptiles from the Triassic isn't the best. But yeah, you can see kind of a lot of these really early branching ones, North America, then you start getting into Europe a little bit, and then you start getting more into parts of East Asia. So, started here, moved over here. Really neat to see. We can kind of track some of their changes in space and time. Okay.
People need to start putting coordinates for where they find these things on the paper so I can go.
Well, the issue is then people are going to go dig it up and, plunder it.
Oh, yes, I am the issue. To be clear in that statement, I am that issue.
Okay, so this one's looking at homoplasia in mammal jaws. Mammal jaws are really interesting because when you're looking at like the earliest reptiles or the earliest synapsids, the lower jaw is made up of multiple bones, whereas we as modern mammals have one, and the other 3 bones have migrated into our ear. That's why mammals are able to hear so many different frequencies. This one looked at a bunch of different early mammaliforms, and what they were able to find, if I can get to the correct bit here, is just the differences in how these different bones were moving throughout there. And as you start getting closer, you're still getting multiple types of ear development as opposed to going straight into the modern mammalian ear shape. So there's not necessarily one preset example of, okay, well, this is how the ear evolution is inevitably going to go. If one of these groups had succeeded, maybe they would not have had mammal type ears. They could have had something very different. I'm really bad at mammal evolution, so if anyone else wants to comment on that, feel free, because I am just Not as familiar with mammals as I could be.
I'm the same. I know barely anything about mammals, and I feel so bad about that. Like, child me failed to find mammals interesting, and now adult me regrets child me's lack of curiosity.
Yeah. And really importantly, some of these are a little bit larger than the first true mammals. So maybe it was also just something that had to do with getting really small that led to this kind of ear shape. It's hard to know for sure. We need some more fossils and, maybe try and track some of the genetics of how that develops in embryos to really test, but it's hard to say. But they
There's
did
a
do a lot
study
of
that was done through
wonderful
the
CT
University
scans
of
to show that.
Washington looking mammalian evolution similar. And I know that they were talking about expanding scope through Central and South America. So something tells me we'll hear more about this when that finally goes through. But that kind of thing works at the pace of getting funding for field work and students willing to do it. So
Yeah, we'll
see
we'll
how long
see.
that takes.
Yeah. So there you go. There's your kind of differences in evolution for the mammal ear in different groups until you get down to the modern mammal condition. All right.
Much younger than Ladocania anguillinae, and has very fragmentary remains, as does that one, which don't really seem to overlap that much, to the degree that I read this paper and all I could think was sus. But I am curious to hear you guys' thoughts on it.
I always find myself really skeptical when we end up with a new theropod that comes out, or really any large carnivorous animal. Just because I think that there's such a culture of publish or perish, and that is like the thing. If you find a big, complete T-Rex fossil or a new subspecies or something cool, that's a huge mark on your career for the rest of your career. You are the person who did that. And I think that at least a psychological level turns into, all right, we have this thing that's super fragmented and there's no real evidence to say that this is definitively this, but we're going to say it anyways because, boy, it would be really awesome if nobody disproved it.
Well, and I will say the paper
And
that
sometimes it's really hard to disprove things.
well, yeah, and so I'm a little. My main thing is this is really trying to push the southern large tyrannosaur argument, and I think that there are some issues with that. And I will say the paper I'm on is looking at some of those concerns, so we'll kind of see how that how we go with that going forward once that's published. But I mean, it's interesting, but it's so partial that maybe sure you can get a new taxa out of it if it is diagnostic in a few traits, but at the same time, I don't know how well of a phylogenetic study you can do because you're missing so many of the traits, right? Maybe if you used very specifically Thomas Carr's 800 character or 1,800 character matrix for Tyrannosaurus Rex, and you applied that to a bunch of different species of tyrannosaurs, you could do it. But that's a lot of characters to try and go through for what is really a lot of very scrappy material. So I'm not entirely sold on it. I'm not necessarily against it either. I think there is some reasonability to think maybe there were different pockets of different tyrannosaurs here and there, but we're going to need to really look at that. Because again, this is kind of like with the hadrosaurs, same time period, same formation, where there's all these different hadrosaurs up and down the coast. Maybe the same thing was happening with tyrannosaurs and we just don't know it yet. So.
Yeah, I mean, if there was one thing that I did pull from the Tyrannosaurus macraensis paper, it's that at least until T-Rex shows up, there was a lot of endemism of tyrannosaurid lineages within North America. And the biogeography of that is very strange based on what we know about their phylogeny at the moment. So I think there's definitely a lot of work yet to be done, but a lot of that work we're not going to do we're not going to be able to do really until we get more specimens described and understood. So I'm glad this study exists. I'm glad this data is out there. I'm just wholly unconvinced that it can be assigned to Labocania, or really,
Tyrannosauridae
or really that there's
indeterminate.
just enough there. Yeah. Like, yeah.
I just want to be able to use this kind of thing as an excuse to go do more field work. Is the bottom
Oh,
line. It
heck
would be
yeah.
awesome if it was a thing. Put me in the desert. Let's do it.
Agreed. Agreed. Put me in the desert too. I need more fun things to do. Someone, if anyone who's funding paleo digs here, give us money.
People in
Send
the
us
chat,
out.
if you have land you want fossils looked for on it, DMs are open.
Same.
All right. Now we're looking at a new Gansuid bird. This is an extinct group which may have survived to the end of the Cretaceous, but was at least around kind of around the middle of the Cretaceous, and is really common for a very short period of time. This is Schuellingornis angelii, which Angela I can read. Um, but it's a new one of these birds. They seemingly were actually fairly common around fresh water, so they could have been ducks before ducks. I know earlier I talked about ducks diverging before the impact. This would have been even further back, and potentially this is just these birds adapting to wetland environments. Again, they're found most commonly in freshwater lakes and freshwater streams. So there's a good diversity of this specific group. So seemingly this is kind of right at the one of the early bursts of diversity for a lot of these birds. You can see this kind of grouping of them here throughout the entire early bird sort of section. You get down here toward, oh, I can go to high res and actually show you guys. Here we go. So
Small
yeah,
interjection here. I feel like every photo of a dinosaur bird I've seen that's angled like that just looks like it's in its awkward.
yeah, since awkward middle school phase. So yeah, as you're getting down here towards Vegavis and Meligris, these are a duck and chicken relative respectively. So you can see it's this kind of slightly early offshoot of the lineage that would lead to birds that is starting to approach some of those characteristics and had its very own unique diversity, as opposed to just kind of being a constant slight change towards what eventually became modern birds. So a really distinct plate of them. Nice to see more diversity. Shows that birds weren't, always just like, oh, well, now they're birds and they're exactly like the modern ones. They did a lot of different stuff. All right, this one's also interesting. Paleontology is looking at fossil pollens, and specifically at the KPG, there's a fern spike where, oh, hey, a lot of these forests died, so suddenly all of these ferns could start to grow. At least in the Hell Creek Formation, which is in the central of North America, and the impactor landed in southern North America going northwards, so Hell Creek got devastated. This is still in North America, but it's from Vancouver Island, and potentially the ancestral Rocky Mountains just helped to shield the impacts, because what they found is there is, yes, a decrease, but there are a number of groups that do get through very well, which is interesting. Obviously, a lot of them do not do as well, but it's a very different pattern than what we see with the fern spike. So there's a lot of trees dying out, but many of the trees still made it through. So really interesting because it's just different than what we expect when we're looking at the rest of the Hell Creek Formation in North American diversity of plants after the impact. And they go through a bunch of these different zones where there's different groups that are surviving or not surviving through that extinction. So yeah, really
I have very little to contribute in terms of pollen paleontology.
yeah.
But something that's kind of cool that you see with tree extinction and tree fossils in the Pacific Northwest are tree lava tubes, where different kinds of ash flow would cover trees and create perfect molds of it. And they're so big around from the old growth that you can crawl through them. And so sometimes you'll be in sections of caves, and all of a sudden the tunnel looks really weird and really different. And oh my God, I'm crawling through a couple million-year-old, a couple 100 meters underground.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna add that sadly, because of the time and the fact that this is, as I mentioned, my final work day before the holiday, I am sadly going to need to leave you guys now. But thank you very much, Zeke, for inviting me on. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to contribute super much about some of these papers, but if you want me on to discuss anything again in the future, always happy to. And likewise, you're always welcome to chat about anything on my channel if you want. So, yeah, thanks a huge amount and lovely to chat to you, Warren. And I'll get back to you. Yeah, I'll get back to you on those with what Martin says after I message him about the cephalopods.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was great talking with you. Have a great day.
You too.
Cheers.
All right, then the next one. See you, Diana. So you're getting going.
Bye.
Bye. The classic bye. This is an overall look at Earth's history over the last 485 million years. Again, modeling. You're not necessarily taking exact numbers from the entire world for each one of those years. We're able to model and use different data points to be able to figure that out. And you can kind of see how it's changing. And yeah, there's this really big cooling event here. Really importantly, at the end of the Cenozoic, oh gosh, I gotta move things again. There we go. Right here, there's this big cooling event, but then you can see it starting to spike up. This low point is where humans evolved, so this warming should be concerning. Also, very importantly, as we're doing more paleoclimate studies, looking at extinctions like this one here, the Permian Triassic, you can see the massive spike in temperature. Really useful to be able to like quantify this and have a graph for the overall time periods that this kind of warming and climate change would have been happening. So, yeah, it's interesting, but again, it's just one of those kind of like big papers that'll be very useful for future work because it summarizes everything. So yeah. Anything to add, Warren? Just climate is
I've got
protect the climate.
Very little to contribute. Just be concerned, take care of business, be eco-friendly.
Yeah, and you can see like the big changes that are happening in coinciding with climate changes. This one was cooling, but still, where there's these mass extinctions because of various climate events, be they warming, be they cooling. The temperature changing fast isn't great.
No, no, it is not. Though it is kind of interesting to see different adaptations things are taking right now.
Oh yeah.
One of I think the most interesting that's been happening due to temperature differentials, we're seeing the introduction of white-nosed bat fungus.
Oh yeah.
Americas,
Yeah.
caused a huge die-off. I'm talking 90 to 95% of all bats in the eastern U.S. But what we're seeing right now is active evolution. They're starting to have increased fat deposits as they're going into hibernation, allowing them. The disease doesn't kill them. What it does is it wakes them up multiple times during the winter, depletes their fat reserves, and they die. They starve.
Yeah. Yeah.
They store more fat. They can wake up. They can make it through a winter even when infected with the disease. So, even though it's been largely devastating, a climate-influenced event we have watched happen has active evolution on a scale that we can measure. I think that that's really, really compelling research.
Yeah, I think there's some people doing stuff with that as well for snake fungal disease.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, cool.
Yeah, SFD.
Not know that was a thing.
Yep. All right, so this is the first tracks from Tibet, which really interesting. But let me get to the figures. There we go, figures. These are really high elevation, so it's hard to try and look for fossils out here, just because, again, you're on the Tibetan Plateau. It's hard to try and, organize for field work up there and maintain high quality field work while you're also oxygen depleted. Based on fossil pollens, there were actually 28 separate layers that were found throughout the entire section. With that said, a lot of them are seeming to be sauropods, but there's also some dromaeosaurs, so the raptor-type dinosaurs, and ornithopods. So you're getting a good, diverse group of animals that are out here. And this is early Cretaceous, so this is kind of what the environment is looking like at this point, but also you're going to be out in this area, and the yellow, where's the yellow dot? I am missing the yellow dot. Here, that's great. There we go. It's a little more coastal than what you're seeing in the rest of East Asia. So interesting to find this. This then got pushed up into the Tibetan Plateau as India came up here and caused the rise of the Himalayan mountains. But yeah, good stuff.
So where they're finding these fossils, is that some of the anticline sites in Tibet that are causing uplift there?
I would believe so, yeah, because I mean, even just looking at it,
Yeah, no, that makes more sense. Because I was thinking just on the step up there.
Here's the fossil site.
Yeah.
Which
that's a big area.
It looks like they just put the photos in sideways, but I know there are a lot of folds and whatnot throughout that area. And you can see here where there's the red lines for where there's weird contacts and faults and such. So,
cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of funniness happening with that geology as well that needs to be mapped out. But nice to have trackways from there. It's good to know, hey, there is fossil material here. As people keep exploring that region of Tibet, you will hopefully find more fossils. Not just of dinosaurs, but of other things.
So crushed and folded.
I mean, some of it can be, but even like the famous Dinosaur National Monument site is on an anticline. There's a reason it stands up like this. So it's crushed some, sure, but it's still able to stand up and you can still really see a lot of the details in those fossils. Jumping over to Tejas, Texas. We have a flat-headed pachycephalosaur, and there's been this idea that's been growing that young pachycephalosaurs had flatter heads, and then as they got older, they became more domed, and we needed to synonymize some of these taxa. This one is interesting as it falls in here. Here's the Texas one. Here's one from New Mexico, and then we go into the larger one that's not necessarily as complete and does have the name, but really it seems like all of these are actually just Stegosaurus, which is a well-represented pachycephalosaur throughout the Campanian during the late Cretaceous. So realistically, it's just like, hey, look, we probably have a new species of these coming from the southern U.S., as well as some of these other Stegosaurus and Stegosaurus relatives that are coming from more northern areas of North America. But again, just another great piece of evidence that, like, this is what we're seeing in their growth.
I just got a text. I need to go pick my little sister up. So I need to jet and go do that. Thank you so much.
No worries. I will get through the rest of these.
So fun.
Yeah.
And everybody in the chat, appreciate you watching. It was a great time. So y'all have a good one.
Yep. Bye, Warren. Have a good one. Bye. Okay. Well, with that said, I'm just going to be giving my spiel on these now. Full text. You're probably going to try and download this, aren't you? Yeah. Yeah, just replace that, sure. Okay, getting one of these found so I can open it up for y'all in the chat. Hopefully you're all hanging together pretty well. Firefox. Here we go. So this is looking at pathologies in Triassic crocodiliforms or pseudosuchians, so not quite crocodiliforms, but closely related. What's really interesting is they're finding these both in some of the more predatory pseudosuchians and some of the more herbivorous ones. What they're finding is that there's, doing thin sections, but there's some crushing essentially that happened that then caused an increase in bone growth. And this happens in both Tarhadia and in Aetosauroides. So really similar damage that's happening, right? Again, you're getting this traumatic event that's occurring, and then you get an infection inside of the bone that grows out, and then there's extra bone growth to help compensate for that damage. So, neat little paper there. Okay, close that. Actually, on that note, I'm going to stop sharing real quick. Go over to here. Go here. Sorry, I'm just trying to set up my other streaming bit real quick so I can just stream without needing to run Zoom. So, just messing with OBS for a second, and I am learning this. This will get more streamlined with time. going to end the call, and then I'll be right back if I drop entirely. I apologize. Video. Okay, looks like I am back already. People are hopefully able to hear me. Let me check the chat here in a moment. Whoop, live chat disappeared. There we go. Bye, Diana. Bye, Diana. Okay, people are saying bye. Hopefully I'm not just talking to myself, but we will see. Okay, well then. Let me get this there and this here. All right. So, yep, that's that one. That's looking at those paleopathologies. Again, they're very similar. And then the other one there. This one is looking at scaling for mass sizes, which is really hard because most of the time it's kind of, well, the femur is blank size. Oh, this is doing the wrong bit, isn't it? Fine. Pull all of you over here. Great. Now I can pull you back out and pull you back out. There we go. I got it to work. Wonderful. Sorry, a little bit of tech issues, but I got it to work. Okay, sorry. So this next one is looking at mass scaling, where a lot of the times it's, oh, hey, the animal's femur is this size, therefore it must have weighed this much overall. This one instead went, well, what if we, instead of just doing the femur is this size, we made 3 models of everything and tried to estimate how much muscle mass there would be by comparing to modern animals, and try and come up with more accurate numbers. And using mammals that are extant, that did work. So living mammals, they did that, it worked out. So really, when we're looking at applying sizes to animals in the fossil record, it makes a lot more sense to try and use this, at least with synapsids, just because it seems like we're going to get more accurate numbers. And, there's a little bit of an outlier with some of these reptile numbers, but they're just built differently than mammals, which are more studied. And I'm still going. Okay. What the heck? Why is my... Okay. Then we are good on that one. This one is really interesting because this is the Earth had a ring. Hopefully people are still able to hear and everything as I get to the Earth had a ring. But the idea is that as the Earth had a ring, we can look at different impact sites throughout the Ordovician. And what you see is there's a whole lot of impacts right around the equator. And they looked at all the various continents. And it is statistically interesting that there's this number of them. There's a very high representation of impacts near the equator. What that means is that it's likely a large asteroid or something came close to Earth and was within the distance that it takes for Earth's gravity to pull it apart. It got pulled apart and formed a ring near the equator, so this bolide was likely coming in very near the plane of the solar system. And then, periodically these started to crash. Really importantly, this also coincides with the mass extinction during the Ordovician, where there was a lot of cooling. So potentially that ring actually caused shading, which then caused the extinction by cooling the Earth. I will certainly try and remember to get all the links in. Maybe later today, but I will try and get them all into the descriptions. Okay, you can close that. Get to the next one. Spinosaurus and Spinosaurus relatives. This is just an ilium, so it's just, a bone. But you can see that it's slightly different from some of these other Spinosaurus specimens, particularly when you're looking at this part of it, right? So what this means is essentially this is also from the Chem beds, and it means there's probably at least 2 species of Spinosaurine in the chem beds, which that's been debated whether or not Sigilmastosaurus is its own species or not, but this is really supporting that idea that, yeah, it is. So really interesting to see. There's more than one very large Spinosaurine in the chem beds. Hopefully we'll find one of them in better condition soon. Okay, so this one's just looking at isotopes that we find in tar beds, so things like La Brea tar pits, and how collagen is preserved, because collagen is really useful because it preserves isotopes of what the animal was eating over the last bit of time, so we can really see what these animals would have been feeding upon. What you're also getting is there's certain amounts of weathering, and the tar can alter some of those. This one is largely just looking at all of this and finding that if you use specific methods, specifically using an FTIR with the Bruker Vertex 70 far infrared Fourier transform infrared spectrometer, you're gonna get more accurate numbers based on what they were looking at with two different fossil tar sites. Oh, and I'm sorry for Diana who had to leave, but she was very excited about this one. This is the oldest edentulous frog, which means it's the oldest frog known that doesn't have teeth. It also is largely just meaning that, hey, frogs lost teeth again. A lot of frogs throughout evolutionary history have actually lost their teeth, and so this is just one more. It's from the Cloverleaf Formation of Wyoming about 111 million years ago. And there are some ones from the early Jurassic in Argentina, but then there's no more reported until the latest Cretaceous, also found in Argentina, but then also some more in the US, Canada, and South Africa. So they're very widespread, but again, this is one of the earlier times we found it, and it's seemingly on an entirely different lineage, so frogs just like to evolve no teeth, seemingly, which is odd. But it works for them, obviously. They're very successful. Also here, sauropod tail clubs. They were looking at how the tail clubs would have been put together. And so here's some of these clubs. And I know I'm saying sauropods. Some people are probably a little bit surprised by me saying sauropods. But that is what some sauropods did, particularly some of the early armored ones. And this is just looking at how they fused multiple bones into the club, and so what it is seeming like is they were all built from three separate fused bones, the ones from China and parts of India, and now the question is basically just, okay, well, did they all evolve that independently, or is there one ancestral occurrence of this? And that's because this is in the lower to middle Jurassic, and that is a time period where these animals are really starting to diversify. So maybe it is ancestral, maybe they developed it separately. So hard to say for sure. Oh, that was another download. I'm sure it's going to say, hey, you've already downloaded this. It does. It's okay, though. We can work with that. Open with Firefox. There we go. Oh, that's the one that I did. What the heck? Is it not the... Did I click the wrong one? Should be this one. Firefox. There we go. So, frigate birds. I'm going to show you all what a frigate bird is. Frigate birds are these. These are sea-going birds. They hang out in the ocean a good long amount of the time. The Eocene clay... or the London clay, which is from the Eocene, has a tarsometatarsus. So this is modern, a modern example of this. Here's the fossil, and then here is the same bone from this animal. And you can see they're fairly similar. The important thing to understand is we have a really poor understanding of these animals, in part because when they're living out at sea for long periods of time, it's hard to study them in the modern day, and then also their fossils end up at the bottom of the ocean in the middle of nowhere, as opposed to somewhere where we're actually going to get fossils of it. So this is really one of the first fossils we have of this group, and being related to many of the other marine-going birds, it's kind of our first look into, hey, look, some of these birds were starting to get out onto the oceans for long periods of time as far back as the Eocene. So really great for understanding seabird evolution. All right, and now we're jumping into Silosaur. Silosaurs are dinosaur-ish. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. There's a lot of debate about this. But there's this new one that has been found, which is Gondwanax paraescensis. And it's from the Santa Maria Formation of Brazil. It's moderately complete, and I say moderately loosely. The hips are really important here because that's one of the defining traits of dinosaurs, is just how much there is a hole straight through those or not. Which there's the sacrum. So I am looking for the acetabulum right here. So acetabulum, how big this hole is. And it seems small in the Silosaurs, which would mean they're not dinosaurs unless they just as they evolved into ornithischians, convergently evolved a larger acetabulum. So interesting questions to be asked for sure. This paper does suggest, hey, look, we're looking at the sacral vertebra, so the vertebra that are right over the hips, and that, yeah, that does continue down into the, we do see this trend of increasing sacral vertebra until you get down into Pisanosaurus, and then later into the ornithischians, which do tend to have more sacral vertebrae at about 5 or more. Some animals like Triceratops got as far as 10. So interesting. I think there needs to be a lot more work done on these guys, but unfortunately they tend to fossilize very poorly. But yeah, and here you can kind of see where it is just at the beginning of the early or late Triassic rather. Miocene changes. Again, we were talking about the tunicates that were from there. Well, suddenly everything dried up. This is basically what that's talking about. You start to see major changes in the kind of faunas that exist as you start to get more and more saline, more salt deposits are forming. You can see how there's these dips and then increases throughout time. There we go. And so they're just going through basically all of these taxa to try and state what it may or may not have been. But it seems like about 30% of the species in the Mediterranean died between about 7.25 and 5.97, about 6 million years ago. So, you know, we know this happened. Now we're finally starting to quantify what happened. Wonder if that's what frog gummy candies... what... Someone was saying they were wondering if that's what frog gummy candies evolved from. Maybe. I mean, frogs are still really weird. As much as they're successful and we can see them regularly, you need to think frogs are just built funny. Okay. And we're still moving back. Oh, I downloaded this, I thought. Regardless, again, London clay. You're looking at these various bone fossils that are related to trogons, which are these birds that are largely equatorial now, and this is from the London clay, which warmer environment, so makes sense maybe they did evolve up there and then just migrated southwards to where they are now. There's also one that is close to the cuckoo rollers, which are this guy. It's a weird little bird, but they do what they do. And so the one that's closely related to this is Sulcatarsis, and it might also be somewhat related to the Accipitriformes, which are things like eagles and hawks and such. So potentially a very early predatory bird. Meanwhile, Macillotrogon is the one that's more closely related to trogon, and you know, we're just finding more birds in this periodically. It's really exciting. And there's also another one that was described in this, which is Xenavicula, which is having a very strange process on the where is it in here? I mean, There we go. There we go. Which is this very strange process on the scapula, which is up here, I believe. So not really like anything else that we know of today. It's just its own weird thing doing a very strange sort of thing. Hard to say what exactly it was doing, but lots of diverse birds back in the day. This one is interesting. So this is saying that this cave painting, and I say cave painting, it's not even a cave painting, it's from the 1800s, based on the dating, but before really Africa was colonized as much, might actually be a representation, paleo art, of the fossil Diectodon, and that's because there's a lot of these found in this region of the Karoo Basin in South Africa. I'm not dissuaded, but I'm not fully convinced either. I think that's the best way for me to say it, in part because, other image, there we go. In part because, okay, you can see it here, there's other cave painting of animals that they were living around. The people from this area do have a concept of a now extinct animal, so very potentially that is something that could be thought of, and this could be it. My only concern is the tusks are so extreme, which yes, they are in this as well, but so long that I almost would suggest that it could be a reconstruction of a viper that just had a weird genetic trait where it still had retained legs, or an amalgamation of a viper with some of the pythons that still have spurs or something. I could be totally wrong. I think this is a really interesting hypothesis. I think there's some legs there for it to like be correct. I just am trying to be very cautious about saying yes it is or yes it isn't. Because I think it's a really interesting idea. I think it's one of those things that's kind of normal in paleontology where we will never know, unfortunately. Okay, shell biomechanics. Okay. Can someone tell me where you are? Just tell me when you're hearing me comment on shell biomechanics, because I want to see how far back the stream is. Anyway, shell biomechanics in turtles. I mean, it's basically what it says, right? You're looking at some of these fossil turtle shells, plotting them to see how they would function, and they're aquatic. They ran through a bunch of stress tests, and okay, cool. Thank you, Danny, for telling me where we are. You guys are maybe a minute back then. Cool. Great. I appreciate it, everyone. Anyway, so yeah, here's the shells. They ran through a bunch of different stress tests, and what they're finding is, hey, these shells would work better underwater than for digging. This has been a really big question because tortoises, great at digging. Turtles that swim, great at swimming. The shell is a very dynamic adaptation that can do a lot of things. But very clearly, these shell shapes are falling inside of aquatic turtles and not terrestrial turtles. So the earliest turtles were probably swimmers. Oh, that's another. Hey, this PDF already exists. Yeah, I know. Just get rid of the old one. Okay. Ooh. So this is a look at some of these brachiopods, and the Dalmaninidae is one of these groups of them. And this paper looked at a bunch of these species from multiple ages, and these are some of the first brachiopod shells preserved as far as the individual, where some of these actually get kind of a juvenile shell and then start growing more of a shell and then start growing their adult shell. And that's because when brachiopods are born, essentially, they're floating around as plankton. And so some of these actually do start to form this shell. What they found is that at least one of these species, Paucicura silmani, had a very long juvenile stage with this shell, meaning it would have still been floating around in the water And that potentially is part of the reason they became so successful later on. Essentially, as they were still floating around, as water levels continued to increase during the early part of the Ordovician, they were able to spread out more efficiently. So yeah, really neat to see how these juvenile characteristics can have really important implications for the species over the long term. Okay, Dunkleosteus. I think that's just one of the ones I did a whole video on, right? Yeah. So this one I actually was reached out to by the author, Russell Engelman, who was able to go, hey, look, I'm doing this. Oh, I wanted that to go to the figures. There we go. Here's a modern reconstruction of Dunkleosteus, and some people got upset about it, but basically lays out how to reconstruct the animal through many different lines of evidence, such as, hey, the pectoral fins should be all the way up here. This carnial process, if you squish it flatter, will interject into the vertebral column, which isn't good to be paralyzed and try and swim around. So what it turns out is, yeah, this means this entire structure would have been quite tall. So you need to think of something that would have been more tuna-shaped rather than flat and wide and shark-shaped, which is really interesting. And he goes in and talks a whole lot about various other applications of this, various estimations, and the error that could be present here. But again, you're still not getting 30-foot long, 10-meter long Dunkleosteus. You're getting 3 to 4 meter long Dunkleosteus, so somewhere between 9 and 12 feet. Still a big fish. I still want to be buddy with it because I feel like I might get eaten. But yeah, really interesting to see just how much work was done here. Here's your kind of halfway line of what it would have been like. Here's all the guts. Here's the muscles attaching the bottom bony plates, and then your muscles for swimming fast through the water. Okay. And then we are getting to, I did write that one. Okay. The last one that I had was one that I forgot to record, which is that the Earth had a ring in the Ordovician. So, I believe that means we are wrapped up. And I need to fix the video bit. Let's remove. Yeah. Camera. Why are you not? Okay, I'm just going to do it this way. I'm having tech issues, so I'm just going to pop up here. Hi, everyone. Really appreciate you all for dropping in. I'm going to give it a minute here so people can say their goodbyes in the chat as I look at that. Yeah, hopefully this worked well enough. I know we had guests in, and it's my first time doing that, so I enjoyed having them here. They gave some very interesting anecdotes and personal experience with some of these papers. So, wonderful to be here. I know this one went, this one actually didn't take as longer than the first one I did, so that's good. We're actually keeping a pretty good amount of time. Once again, I appreciate those of you who hung around the whole time, those of you who had to leave early. I hope you get back and watch the VOD because I still appreciate you guys. Wonderful to be here again. Like, I just can't thank you guys enough for showing up to these. It really makes me feel like I am doing something positive for the community. Store should be up soon. We are working on the last 2 or 3 steps of it. So keep an eye out for cool shirts like, trilobites that are pyretized in white sands. So yeah, happy holidays, everyone. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, wherever you may celebrate. Happy New Year if you don't celebrate any of the religious holidays, right? It's always a good time to get together and visit with people if you can. Okay, people are saying liked having guests. I'm certain that people are going to comment that down below as well as this gets out and people are leaving comments on the overall monthly review. So, excited. We'll be able to get them in the UK. You should be able to get them in the UK. You may have to pay separately for shipping. That's the big thing. I am also potentially going to be trying to get to the next SVP in Birmingham. And if we do that, I am probably going to be trying to set up a table at that SVP where I can be trying to sell them. And then if you also happen to be in the UK, I can drop them in a mailbox or something. So we'll see what we are doing as we get closer to those dates. With that said, everyone, I really do appreciate it. Be safe, take care as always, and of course, don't go extinct.